Chapter 1443, 95th place. This was Chunzong's final ranking after killing his opponent and obtaining half of his opponent's points. There was only one day left before the 1-month deadline. On this day, many geniuses were frantically searching for others to kill and obtain points. Chunzong also encountered 2 peerless geniuses in succession. One of them died under Chunzong's sword, causing Chunzong's points to increase further, and his ranking rose to 88th. The other genius was very strong. Chunzong went through an extremely difficult battle, but in the end, he was unable to kill him and let him escape. Time's up. A majestic voice directly resounded through the void and spread in all directions. It was as mighty as the sound of divine thunder at the beginning of the world. At the same time as the voice rang out, a mighty and irresistible force descended from the sky, suppressing everyone's bodies in an instant, causing them to be unable to move at all. Some geniuses who were fighting fiercely suddenly paused, as they had no choice but to move. A few of the Heaven's Prides who were about to use their killer moves to kill their opponents and steal their points also stopped. The intense light from their killer moves was less than an inch away from their opponents. Just a little bit more, and it would be enough to hit and kill their opponents. In the span of a breath, everything came to a standstill, as if time and space in the entire world had been frozen. However, the interesting thing was that everyone's consciousness was clear, and they were clearly aware of their current state at this very moment. It was as if they were ants being dominated by someone else. Their life and death were not in their own hands, and everything was under the control of others. If they wanted to live, they would live, and if they wanted to die, they would die instantly. This feeling was extremely unpleasant. Power. This feeling immediately made everyone thirst for power even more, and Chunzong was no exception. Only with great power could one better control one's own fate and not be controlled by others. In the blink of an eye, everyone immediately felt an extremely strong and irresistible repulsive force land on their bodies, as if the will of the world itself was repelling them, expelling everyone. In an instant, everyone disappeared from the world of the Xian Yuan treasure scroll. Soon after, streaks of light descended from the Xian Yuan treasure scroll and turned into figures after landing. They were the 1,080 Sky Prides who had entered the Xian Yuan treasure scroll. With a glance, everyone realized that they had left the world of the Xian Yuan treasure scroll. 1 month. In the world of the Xian Yuan treasure scroll, a month of life and death battles had suddenly appeared here. Everyone was not used to it. However, everyone was extraordinary, and they quickly adapted to it. Their gazes fell on the light screen in midair and the names on the light screen. The 108 names at the top were also the most eye-catching. All the geniuses were either confident, expectant, or hesitant, try to see their own names at the top. When he didn't see his name, an indescribable disappointment surged like a tide, swallowing his mind and almost suffocating him. Whether or not his name entered the top 108 meant that he would be able to participate in the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. How can this be? Some of the geniuses couldn't accept the reality of the situation and mumbled to themselves in a daze. With his strength, how could he not be able to obtain one of the 108 names? However, the points on the light screen were clear as day. There was no mistake about how many points he had. Moreover, the points he had were indeed not qualified to be listed in the top 108 because the points of the top 108 were much higher than his. When Chunzong saw his name, even with his temperament, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. The Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly was held once every 100 years, and it was related to the supreme treasure, the Mystic Yuan Sacred Tower. It was a rare opportunity, and it would be a pity if he missed it. After all, it was held once every 100 years, and 100 years was not a short time for the geniuses. It was enough time for their cultivation to break through to the Saint Realm. However, a Saint Realm cultivator was not qualified to participate in the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. Of course, a Saint Realm cultivator had the opportunity to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Tower, but it was very difficult. It was a rare opportunity to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Tower, when one was a half-saint. It meant that one would surpass one's peers and surpass one's seniors. 93rd place. At the last moment, someone's ranking increased further, causing Chunzong's ranking to drop from 88th to 93rd. However, whether it was 88th or 93rd place, as long as one could enter the top 108 and obtain a spot to enter the mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly, it would be enough. Chunzong also saw some familiar names on the light screen. For example, Feng Yinyin, the top genius of the Mountain Flow Mansion, Fierce Phoenix King, was ranked 58th. Zhao Xingkong's name was ranked 69th. Su Mubai's ranking was slightly higher, at 65th. As for Jian Lingxiao, it was a pity. His name was ranked 109th, and he was only one name away from obtaining a spot to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. The ranking did not completely represent one's strength, but when the difference in ranking was huge, it also represented the difference in strength. For example, the peerless geniuses ranked in the top 10 or even the top 30 were definitely stronger than the peerless geniuses ranked 80th, 90th, and 100th. After all, the more powerful one was, the more points one could obtain. However, no matter what, obtaining a spot to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly was a good thing, as it meant that one was qualified to enter the final competition. As for those who did not obtain a spot, it did not matter whether they were strong or weak. Most of the experts and geniuses from the Mystic Underworld territory were overjoyed. This time, 2 people from the Mystic Underworld territory had entered the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. However, the experts from the Mountain Flow Mansion were very unhappy, as only 2 people from the entire Mountain Flow Mansion had entered the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. It was actually not bad to have 2 spots. After all, among the 27 mansions in the 1 capital, 3 paths, and 9 states, many mansions had only 1 person who had obtained a spot. The reason why the experts from the Mountain Flow Mansion were unhappy was that the Mystic Underworld territory, which they looked down on, had obtained 2 spots. In fact, some mansions did not even obtain a single spot. The experts from the mansions who did not obtain a spot had ugly expressions on their faces. However, the outcome had already been decided, and there was nothing they could do. Chunzong felt a sharp, violent, and domineering gaze piercing through the void, as though it wanted to pierce through his body. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart, and when he looked back, he saw 2 sharp, murderous gazes that seemed to want to pierce through him and kill him. It was the genius whose left ear had been shattered by his sword in the Mystic Yuan Treasure Scroll world. That person's left ear had already recovered, and Chunzong could see the sharp, murderous intent in his eyes. He expected that this person would definitely seek revenge on him, but Chunzong was not afraid. Congratulations to all the geniuses for obtaining a spot to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly and entering the real Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. A majestic voice rang out. It was a little low, but it contained an unparalleled majesty that suppressed the sky, causing the surrounding heaven and earth Yuan Qi to fall silent. It was the king of the Mystic Yuan dynasty. The Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly will begin in 3 days. The king did not say much, but this sentence made everyone excited. The Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. All the geniuses started from the prefecture competition, went through the state competition, and went through the cultivation competition just now. All of them had come so far for the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. Even peerless geniuses like Yang Quan, He Yinza, and Yi Qindao could not help but feel excited. This was because they knew the mysteries of the Mystic Yuan Sacred Tower, and they were eager to enter it. However, even with the ability of the forces behind them, they could not get a spot to enter. They could only rely on their own efforts to participate in the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly. The 108 geniuses who had obtained a spot to enter the Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly were arranged to stay in the Mystic Sky Park. The Mystic Sky Park occupied a vast area, and there were countless houses that were located in clusters. The periphery was enveloped by a large array. Once it was activated, even a half-step Great Saint Realm expert would not be able to break through it in a short period of time. Everyone's safety was greatly guaranteed. One had to know that these 108 geniuses were selected from numerous battles. Perhaps some of them were not necessarily stronger than those who were eliminated, but they were able to obtain a spot because they were outstanding. All in all, when these geniuses grew, they would further enhance the overall strength of the Mystic Yuan dynasty and the Mystic Yuan world. No matter how strong the protection was, it would not be too much. The death of any one of them would be a great loss. Not only was the Mystic Sky Park protected by a powerful array, but there were also many Mastery Saint Rudiment stage experts secretly guarding it. There were even 2 half-step Great Saint Realm experts personally guarding it. Even if the experts from the Dark Forces made a move, they would not be able to kill any of the peerless geniuses. This was because the Great Saint Realm expert guarding the Mystic Yuan dynasty would make a move in a very short period of time. Shenzong stayed in one of the palaces. This palace was not big, but it was very stylish and artistic. As soon as Shenzong stepped into it, his mind was clear and there were no distracting thoughts. His entire person seemed to be in a profound state, which was somewhat helpful for his comprehension. Moreover, the world's essence here was very rich, which surprised Shenzong. Compared to the world's essence in the Mystic Yuan Treasure Scroll world, the world's essence here was at least 50% richer and purer. However, his cultivation had now reached the peak of the half-step Saint Realm. In terms of cultivation realm, unless he broke through to the Saint Realm, he could not improve it. But I can still improve the level of my cultivation technique, Chunzong thought to himself, his eyes shining brightly. Although his cultivation could not be improved, his cultivation technique could still be improved. Once it was improved, his half-step saint power would become more vigorous and pure, and the explosive power would also be more powerful, which was equivalent to the improvement of his strength. Without hesitation, Chunzong did not waste any time. He immediately sat cross-legged, cleared all distracting thoughts, and quickly cultivated. A large amount of world's essence quickly surged from all directions and poured into Chunzong's body. Chapter 1444. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. One after another, the 108 Sky Prides woke up from their cultivation and walked out of the palace. In the sky, strong winds blew endlessly, and the clouds drifted endlessly. The real Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly was about to begin. The Sky Pride's eyes shone brightly. They were full of energy, and spirit, showing their astonishing confidence and faith. The Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly was held in the Mystic Yuan Dynasty's capital, and it was called the Divine Mystic Palace. Normally, the Divine Mystic Palace would not be opened, and it would only be opened for important occasions. The Mystic Yuan Sacred Assembly, which was held once every 100 years, was naturally not a small matter. It was a grand event of great importance. The Divine Mystic Palace was magnificent and stood alone among the palaces in the capital. It exuded an incomparably mysterious aura that intoxicated the nearby Saint Realm powerhouses. They could feel that the place was filled with traces of Tao intent. They were fluctuating like elves dancing in joy in all directions. They could feel this just by getting close to it. What would happen if they entered it? The group of powerhouses was looking forward to it. The gate of the Divine Mystic Palace was closed. It was green and seemed to have countless rays of brilliance flowing around it. Each ray of brilliance exuded an incomparably ancient and profound aura. Shenzong looked awe-inspiring. He could feel traces of Tao rhymes from the brilliance. The so-called Tao rhymes were a type of Tao intent. The stronger the Tao rhymes, the more beneficial it would be for one's comprehension of Tao intent. The gate alone contained a strong Tao rhyme. What would happen if they entered it? How strong would the Tao rhymes be? For a moment, Chunzong was slightly excited. The other Sky Prides were the same. The Divine Mystic Palace. It looked like a palace, but it was actually a precious treasure. It was rumored that the ancestor of the Mystic Yuan dynasty had brought back a supreme artifact from the void outside the realm. It contained great power. The condensation of Tao rhymes was just a side effect. Of course, just the side effect of the Tao rhymes was enough to shock the group of Sky Prides and powerhouses. It could be called a cultivation holy land. Open. There seemed to be a mighty sound that reverberated in all directions. The gate in front of everyone trembled slightly. Then, there was a mighty sound as the gate slowly opened inwards. The moment a crack appeared, a gust of wind blew out. The wind blew against Chunzong's face, causing him to shiver. He had an indescribable feeling. It was a wind that contained countless Taoist rhymes. It was a Taoist rhyme wind. All of a sudden, Chunzong seemed to have sensed countless Tao rhymes. Wind, fire, water, earth, lightning, light, darkness. However, it was too brief, so Chunzong could only faintly sense it and didn't have time to comprehend it. Chunzong felt that if he was able to persist for a longer period of time, then perhaps he would be able to comprehend a second type of half-step Tao insight. At that time, his strength would be even stronger. Of Tao intent, of Tao, of heaven of Tao, of Tao of Tao, of Tao of Tao's Tao. Of course, while Tao of Tao was important, one's cultivation could not be neglected. Otherwise, if one's cultivation was too low, it would be difficult to unleash one's full potential. A true powerhouse had no shortcomings. At least, there were no obvious shortcomings. Enter. When the gate of the divine mystery palace opened halfway, there seemed to be another mighty sound that reverberated in everyone's souls. Step forward. The group of sky prides stepped into the divine mystery palace. It was dark inside, and nothing could be seen. However, when everyone stepped in, it suddenly lit up. There seemed to be countless green lights that filled all directions. The green lights spun like stars, and there was an indescribable brilliance and magnificence. The rich Tao rhymes almost made people lose themselves. At this point, the 108 sky prides participating in Xianyuan's sacred assembly were separated from the other powerhouses and sky prides. The 108 sky prides strode forward. Once again, they passed through a gate that flickered like flowing water. The 108 sky prides suddenly appeared in an open space. The open space was circular and very large. However, the light was somewhat dim. It seemed that there was only a ray of light shining down from above. It felt like a patio. Immediately, the light that shone down from above became more intense. However, it was not dazzling at all. Instead, it lit up the entire area. Rays of light flickered and condensed in the air, turning into lotus platforms. Each lotus platform was the same size and color. They all had 12 petals. There were a total of 108 lotus platforms, corresponding to the 108 sky prides. In an instant, the 108 sky prides were enlightened. They leaped up and flew straight up, landing on the lotus platforms. The 108 lotus platforms were all filled in an instant. They naturally floated in all directions, leaving the most central open space. Immediately, countless rays of light circulated and condensed in the central open space. A huge 36-petal lotus platform that was 1,000 meters in diameter appeared. When the huge 12-petal lotus platform appeared, there seemed to be Tao rhymes in the air. The rules of the Xianyuan sacred battle. Everyone will have to fight to the death with the others. A mighty voice suddenly rang out. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. It sounded very simple and easy to understand. It meant that one would have to fight against 107 other sky prides. Moreover, it was not an ordinary battle. It was a battle to the death. Just thinking about it made one realize how cruel it was. 107 battles to the death. It was not just a matter of strength. One also needed to have a strong will and determination. Otherwise, it would be difficult to endure. If it were any other sky prides, they would definitely not be able to endure more than 100 battles to the death in a short period of time. This was also a kind of training. It was also a way to develop one's own potential. The Xianyuan Sacred Battle will determine your ranking on the Xianyuan Little Saint ranking. The higher your ranking, the longer you can cultivate in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower, the mighty voice said again. 108th place, you can cultivate in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower for 2 hours. 107th place, you can cultivate in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower for 4 hours. And so on. First place, you can cultivate in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower for 108 hours. Chunzong's understanding of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower was superficial. Therefore, he did not know how amazing it was to be able to cultivate in the sacred tower for 108 hours. However, those sky prides who knew about the Xinyuan sacred tower were all excited. Even if they could not get first place, as long as they could get into the top 10, they could cultivate for close to 100 or even 100 hours. How amazing was that? Even if they could only get into the top 20 or 30, they could still cultivate for 80 to 90 hours. For a moment, everyone was excited. If you win, you'll get 2 victory points. If you draw, you'll get 1 victory point. If you lose, you'll get no victory points. The Xinyuan Sacred Battle is a battle to the death. You will be chosen randomly. As soon as the voice finished speaking, the lotus seats suddenly shone with light. About 10 breaths later, 2 of the lotus seats shone brightly while the rest of the lotus seats dimmed. In the next moment, the 2 figures on the 2 lotus seats flashed out of thin air and disappeared from the lotus seats. However, they reappeared in the center of the huge lotus seat below, facing each other from a few hundred meters away. Clearly, the 2 of them had not fully reacted. They were still a little confused. After quickly looking around, they finally understood their situation. Duel. They had been chosen as the 2 sides for the first duel. Their eyes suddenly became sharp as they gathered their strength in an instant. One of them was a sky pride from the Xinyuan ancient path, while the other was a sky pride from the Mingyuan path. Their eyes focused as they stared at each other with incomparable sharpness. Traces of killing intent bloomed in their eyes. This was a duel of life and death. There was a mysterious power here that could make people die, but they would not really die. Therefore, they could go all out and use all their strength without restraint to kill their opponent. Killing their opponent would give them 2 victory points. The more victory points they had, the higher their ranking. If they did not lose, they would definitely get first place in the end. The 2 of them gradually sped up and moved quickly. They gradually closed in on each other and launched probing attacks. First, they probed to see how strong each other was before making a counterattack. After a few rounds of probing, the 2 of them seemed to have found out something and immediately unleashed their true strength. Boom! When the 2 of them collided, an extremely terrifying and violent force blasted out in all directions. It was like a rolling wave that was extremely tyrannical. An extremely shocking might spread out in all directions, directly bombarding the 36 lotus leaves on the huge lotus platform. It was like a raging wave crashing against the shore, but it was all blocked, unable to shake the lotus leaves in the slightest. Instead, it shattered on its own, gradually reverberating within the lotus platform, transforming into gusts of wild wind that blew and whistled. Die! The sky pride from the Xinyuan ancient path was a body cultivator. His physique was extremely strong. Half of his mixed heavenly power surged into his right arm. His muscles swelled, and his tendons protruded like pythons and dragons. A terrifying blood chi filled the air and rushed out, causing his arm to turn red like a soldering iron and emit an extremely high temperature. He punched out. Vaguely, there seemed to be an ancient beast roaring in the sky that wanted to destroy everything. You're the one who's going to die. The peerless sky pride from a Ming Yuan Dao path had a cold look on his face. His body stirred up a storm that was filled with an extremely terrifying aura. It roared out and destroyed everything. Once they collided, an even more terrifying force burst out and surged crazily. Once, twice, thrice. Every time they collided, there would be a shocking shockwave that crashed onto the lotus leaves and shattered, turning into a turbulent flow and then into a mighty gale. The wind whistled and raged endlessly. The Tao that the peerless sky pride from a Ming Yuan Dao path had comprehended and grasped was a half-step wind Tao will. At this moment, on the lotus seat where the wind was raging endlessly, it was perfect for him to use it. With a kick, the gale was drawn and blasted out together. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Every kick was a strike. The speed was getting faster and faster, and the power was also getting stronger and more terrifying. The peerless sky pride from the Xinyuan ancient path had an extremely solemn expression. His blood chi seemed to be burning as the shadow of an ancient beast appeared behind him. It was his chi spirit. He unleashed his full strength and continuously resisted the opponent's attacks while slowly retreating. Die, die, die. The peerless sky pride from the Ming Yuan Dao path roared 3 times in a row and blasted out 3 kicks in an instant. The 3 kicks condensed into 1 kick. Amidst the raging gale, one could vaguely see traces of electric arcs jumping. Boom! Chapter 1445. Boom! The peerless heavens chosen, one of the Ming Yuan Dao sect's leg, was like a lightning dragon drilling through the air. It landed heavily on the chest of the heavens chosen, one of the Xian Gu Dao sects 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 strongest victory, 2 victory points. The candidates for the second battle were also chosen in a short span of 10 breaths. This time, everyone was mentally prepared. Therefore, the 2 prodigies who were chosen to appear on the gigantic 36-petaled lotus platform reacted instantly. They gathered their strength and engulfed their bodies. An astonishing aura also spread out. Boom, boom, boom. The terrifying aura collided and turned into an astonishing storm that raged in all directions. They had not yet made a move, but they were already exchanging blows. Immediately, the 2 of them attacked and engaged in a fierce battle. Chunzong stared at the 2 of them in the battle, trying to see each of their moves as clearly as possible. His mind was working at lightning speed. He put himself in their shoes and imagined fighting against each other, dismantling each other's moves, counterattacking, and even defeating each other. This was no doubt a heavy burden on his mind. Fortunately, Chunzong's mind was strong enough to withstand it. In fact, Chunzong was not the only one who did this. The other prodigies were doing the same. Fighting with strong opponents was a way to hone oneself. Watching the strong fight was also an indirect way to hone oneself and further strengthen oneself. There were 108 people here, all of whom were peerless prodigies. Perhaps there was a difference in strength, but they all had their own strengths and were worth watching. Of course, for those extremely strong prodigies, the current battle was not enough to arouse their interest. Everyone had their own way of cultivation, and Chunzong's way was to constantly observe and experience, so as to accumulate, consolidate, sharpen, and improve. This battle lasted for half an hour, and the winner was decided immediately. Immediately, the third battle began. One battle after another went on. There was no time to rest at all. The people who were killed would disappear on the gigantic 36-petaled lotus platform and appear on their own 12-petaled lotus platform. Other than experiencing the feeling of death, they would not suffer any other losses. In the 12th battle, the lights kept flashing. Chunzong's lotus platform shone brightly. Chunzong knew that he had been chosen. However, he did not know who his opponent was. Of course, it didn't matter which of the 107 peerless geniuses his opponent was, because Chunzong would have to fight the other 107 people to the death. Of course, if they could win the first round, it would undoubtedly cultivate a trace of sharpness, which would more or less be of help to the following battles. However, it wasn't absolute. Chunzong's figure flashed and disappeared from the 12-petal lotus platform. He reappeared on the 36-petal giant lotus platform. Another figure appeared several hundred meters away from him. The figure had his eyes closed, as if he was enjoying something. However, there was a faintly discernible fluctuation of aura emanating from his body. The fluctuation of aura immediately made Chunzong's hair stand on end. It was terrifying. Chunzong's heart skipped a beat. Subconsciously, he gathered all his strength to protect himself. In an instant, that person opened his eyes and a cold light shot out like a shooting star. It pierced through the air and shot towards Chunzong, causing Chunzong's pupils to shrink to the size of needles in an instant. He was instantly horrified. A trace of blood bloomed in the depths of the figure's eyes, which seemed to be magnified in front of Chunzong's eyes. It was as if a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood was coming at him. Immediately, the figure's lips curled into a sinister smile. "As my first opponent, it's your misfortune." The cold and evil voice sounded. In an instant, the terrifying aura swept over like a hurricane, making Chunzong's hair stand on end. He was chosen as Li Han's first opponent. This person's luck is really bad. In the periphery, a group of experts could see. Those who were familiar with Li Han shook their heads and laughed. That's true. Li Han is the number 2 genius of the Li family in the capital city. In the capital city, the surname Chu was the most respected. It was the royal surname of the Xianyuan dynasty. However, in the capital city, or in the entire Xianyuan dynasty, there were 2 other clans besides the Chu family with the surname Wang. They were the Li family and the Zhong family. With the Chu family as the leader, the Li family and the Zhong family were slightly behind them. They were the 3 most powerful forces in the capital city, and the other forces could not be compared to them. The 3 clans have been passed down for countless years, and they have been passed down from the same era. The ancestors of the Li family and the Zhong family had once assisted the ancestor of the Chu family to establish the Xianyuan dynasty. In the Xianyuan dynasty, the Li family and the Zhong family status could be said to be second only to the Chu family. As the number 2 genius of the Li family, Li Han was extremely talented and powerful. In the previous Xianyuan treasure scroll world, he was ranked in the top 10. This was a strong opponent, a very powerful one. Make your move. Let's see how far you can go. Li Han exuded a terrifying aura, but did not make the first move. Instead, he spoke in a cold tone with a hint of arrogance. This kind of contempt did not make Chunzong angry. Instead, it made him solemn. Chunzong stared at his opponent. For a moment, he did not know where to start because he felt that his opponent was full of flaws. There were flaws everywhere. There were only 2 situations. First, his opponent was very weak, and the gap between them was too big. Therefore, he seemed to be full of flaws. Second, his opponent was very strong, even stronger than himself. Therefore, although he seemed to be full of flaws, in fact, he deliberately revealed them to lure his opponent. If he attacked when those were the real flaws, he would definitely suffer a strong counterattack. This person was obviously the latter. Suddenly, a trace of fighting spirit spread out from the deepest part of Chunzong's heart. To be able to have a life and death battle with such a strong opponent, and not have to worry about real death, he could fight without any scruples. Even if he was defeated and killed in the end, he would have no regrets. After all, this was a very rare experience. What could stimulate one's potential more than a true life and death battle? As his thoughts raced, Chunzong's eyes became brighter and sharper. His aura spread out, like a sharp sword unsheathed, and vaguely, it seemed to tear the entire Lotus platform apart. Interesting. Li Han was slightly surprised. He did not expect that his opponent would not show the slightest fear under his aura. Instead, he condensed such a shockingly sharp aura. Immediately, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. However, he still did not take Chunzong seriously. The 13th level of the Taiyuan cloud scraping technique was fully activated. In 3 days, Chunzong successfully raised the Taiyuan cloud scraping technique from the 12th level to the 13th level with the help of the pure and boundless qi of heaven and earth in the Shantian garden. The increase in the level of the cultivation technique caused Chunzong's high-level half-saint power to become more vigorous and pure, causing his strength to increase by a lot. Full force. Half-step heart, sword Dao intent of 90%. Celestial crystal dominating body of lesser mastery. Greater mastery of flowing light shadow. In an instant, Chunzong turned into a ray of flowing light and approached Li Han. Li Han did not seem to notice and did not move at all. He just stared at Chunzong, who appeared in front of him with a faintly discernible smile on the corners of his mouth. The light in Chun Zong's eyes was extremely sharp. The moment he approached Li Han, his right hand clasped the sword hilt and pulled out the gilded heavy mountain sword like a knife cutting water. In an instant, an extremely terrifying sword attack burst out. Horizontal slash. Even though it was not the extreme heart sword style, it was still a very powerful sword attack. The sword light was extremely fierce and unparalleled. It was as if a mountain would be directly cut into pieces under the sword. However, in that instant, the sword slashed through the air and missed. Li Han, who was full of openings, seemed to have disappeared in an instant. He did not really disappear, but Li Han's speed was extremely fast. In an instant, he took a step back and cleverly avoided Chun Zong's horizontal slash. He took a step forward and the second slash followed. Third slash. Fourth slash. Fifth slash. The gilded mountainous sword seemed as if it didn't have the slightest bit of weight as it ceaselessly slashed out. Every single sword strike contained Chun Zong's entire strength, and every single sword strike was extremely formidable and ferocious, causing an extremely terrifying storm of swords to arise, and it caused the hearts of everyone to tremble. You have some strength. Not enough. You are still not Li Han's opponent. Although Chun Zong's attack was very shocking, he could not hit Li Han. Li Han's body movement and footwork seemed simple, but in fact, it was very mysterious. Every step seemed to be in accordance with some kind of mystery. He very cleverly avoided Chun Zong's big sword attack. As Chun Zong attacked with his sword, he also paid attention to Li Han's footwork. Looking at it, he suddenly felt a little dizzy. It was difficult to describe the mystery. Slash. 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 Chun Zong knew that if he could see through the mystery of his opponent's footwork, he might be able to hit his opponent. With his super strong soul, his amazing comprehension ability was fully activated. As he attacked with his sword, he comprehended at the same time. The others did not know, not even Li Han himself. In fact, Li Han did not take Chun Zong seriously. There were only a few people who could be regarded as opponents by him. The others were not in his eyes at all. Now, Li Han had a playful attitude. He was playing with Chun Zong. This was also Li Han's usual style. Little did he know that his play gave Chun Zong a very good opportunity to fully display his strength and observe the mystery of his opponent's footwork. He used this to improve himself. No one knew how terrifying Chun Zong's comprehension ability was. After about 30 slashes, Chun Zong's sword paused slightly. The light in his eyes was completely restrained. A trace of indescribable, mysterious aura spread out. Heart domain. Extreme heart swordsmanship. It started from the heart and stopped at the sword. As he attacked with his sword, the sword light condensed into a beam. It pierced through the sky like a finger. The speed of the sword reached the extreme, but it also seemed to break through the limit. The moment the sword stabbed out, it had already appeared in front of Li Han, directly between his eyebrows. If this sword pierced through, it would be enough to smash Li Han's head into powder. He would die very miserably. In an instant, Li Han's heart trembled. His pupils shrank to the size of needles. He only felt a great sense of horror. It was as if he saw the hand of death reaching out from hell and grabbing his soul. It was as if it wanted to capture him and drag him into hell, sinking him into eternal oblivion. It was hard to imagine that his opponent could actually perform a sword attack that frightened him. Chapter 1446. Extreme Heart Swordsmanship. It was a sword attack with all his strength, and it was a sword attack that seized the opportunity for an instant, but it didn't work. This made Chun Zong feel a little regretful. After all, he had used dozens of sword attacks to paralyze his opponent, to pave the way for the final extreme heart swordsmanship. For a strong opponent like Li Han, the extreme heart swordsmanship wouldn't work at all when he used it at the beginning. Instead, it would let his opponent see through it and be more vigilant. Although this sword attack didn't work, it made Li Han feel a chill in his heart, and he was scared. Almost just a little bit, he would have been hit by that sword. Even with his strength, if he was hit, only death would await him. If he was defeated by those who he regarded as strong opponents, Li Han could accept it. But if he was defeated by someone who was weaker than him because of his slight contempt, he couldn't accept it. It was a disgrace. This feeling made Li Han angry. His eyes became colder and colder, and his face was gloomy. Traces of killing intent lingered, and his breath became more and more terrifying, making Chunzong feel cold all over for no reason. You have successfully angered me. Li Han's voice was like a cold wind from the extreme north, freezing everything and shocking the world. The moment Chunzong's pupils contracted unconsciously, a shocking chill came. The chill grew from his spine and rushed to his brain. In front of him was a flash of bright sword light. Fast. Too fast. It was so fast that he was unprepared, and the sword had already attacked. How did he attack? He didn't know, because he couldn't see it clearly at all. This saber strike that was filled with anger contained Li Han's full strength, all for the sake of killing Chunzong. His hair stood on end. Chunzong could only rely on the subconscious that was tempered by countless life and death situations to explode. He quickly retreated and blocked with his sword. Chunzong blocked the blade by a hair's breadth, but the extremely terrifying cold qi flowed along the blade of the sword. It was as if it had frozen his arms and body, causing Chunzong's arms and body to go numb. His reaction also slowed down a bit in that instant. Even though he quickly operated the ancient flame refining technique to dispel the chill, it was too late. The second sword attack had already arrived. Too fast. Chunzong's consciousness had just sensed it, but his body slowed down a little because of the chill of the previous saber strike. His vision suddenly turned black. Die. He was killed by Li Han with a single slash. And, sheathing his saber, Li Han stared at the body that had been cut in half and laughed disdainfully. In the next breath, Chunzong appeared on the original 12-petal lotus platform. There was still a trace of fear on his face, and it took him a few breaths to recover his calm. But it was only on the surface, and it was difficult for him to calm down in his heart. Death. This kind of feeling of death was really unbearable. In an instant, he fell into darkness. He couldn't hear, see, or feel anything. It was as if he had fallen into eternal darkness. How terrifying. The kind of dark terror of death was like a virus that corroded one's mind. Fortunately, Chunzong was also a person who had experienced a real death and reincarnated into the Lingwu holy world. Therefore, he really calmed down very quickly. If it were other people who didn't have such an experience, it was inevitable that they would find it difficult to calm down for a period of time. Li Han appeared on another lotus platform. His sharp and cold eyes stared at Chunzong as if he wanted to penetrate Chunzong's body. It was as if he wanted to kill Chunzong a second time to vent his hatred. Chunzong didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he calmed down and started to reflect. No matter what Li Han's personality was like, his strength was undeniably strong. That mysterious footwork avoided dozens of slashes from his sword. The last two slashes were not only extremely fast, but also extremely powerful. All of this was worth reflecting on. The next battle continued, but Chunzong didn't watch. He was immersed in his own reflection. The mysterious footwork, the ultimate saber technique, and the darkness of death and the light of rebirth. It was a cycle of life and death. Between life and death was a great terror, but also a great opportunity. Whether one could grasp it or not depended on the person. Chunzong felt that he seemed to be able to grasp it. After losing a battle, Chunzong didn't gain any victory points. Therefore, he had no chance of getting first place. However, Chunzong didn't feel regretful. With his current strength, it was indeed difficult to get first place. Then, he just had to do his best to get the final place. In short, in this cruel battle, he still had the hope of continuing to improve and go further. Battle after battle, some won and some lost. Chunzong didn't watch the battle. He was still immersed in his own reflection. This battle had brought him great benefits. After he finished his reflection, Chunzong felt that the half-step sword intent seemed to show signs of improvement. 90% to 100%. This would be an even greater improvement, at least 50%. Chunzong secretly estimated. It was expected that many of these exceptional geniuses had comprehended the half-step Dao intent to 100%. Some of them might even have mastered more than one half-step Dao intent. That was why their strength was so strong. Otherwise, although there was a gap in their cultivation, they wouldn't be able to easily kill each other with their cultivation at the peak of the half-saint level. It would only be so when the gap in all aspects was combined. After comprehending to the extreme, the half-step sword intent was still at 90%. It wouldn't be easy to break through, so Chunzong wasn't in a hurry. The battle of life and death continued. Some won, some lost, and some tied. Sumu Bai, who came from the mysterious underworld territory with Chunzong, defeated his opponent and gained 2 victory points. Chunzong also knew that he would eventually have to fight with Sumu Bai. It was just a matter of time. Soon, all 108 geniuses had made their moves. The first round was over. After the first round ended, the second round didn't start immediately. Instead, they were given 15 minutes. At the end of the day, the Xinyuan Sacred Battle was to determine the final ranking, but it was also to further stimulate everyone's potential and bring them to the peak of the half-saint level. Therefore, it was necessary to give everyone some time to relax after a round of battle of life and death. After a while, the second round began. In the 8th round, Chunzong was chosen again. His opponent was someone he didn't know, but he was also an exceptional genius from the capital. Many of the 108 geniuses who had entered the Xinyuan Sacred Battle were from the capital. Almost all of them belonged to the Royal Chu clan, the Li clan, and the Zhong clan. The person in front of Chunzong was dressed in a white jade robe with a white jade pendant hanging from his waist. He had an extraordinary temperament. When he opened his eyes, a sharp cold light shot out. You were first defeated by Li Han, and now you're going to be defeated by me, Zhong Feihong. I really can't bear it. The person pretended to sigh softly. He shook his head as if he really felt sorry, but there wasn't any pity in his eyes. Instead, there was a trace of coldness. Don't boast too early. Chunzong smiled slightly. This person was a disciple of the Zhong clan, an exceptional genius from the Zhong clan. He was indeed powerful, but the threat he brought to Chunzong was not as great as that of Li Han. Shameless boasting. I'll let you wake up. Zhong Feihong smiled coldly and slapped out. They were hundreds of meters apart, but the slap swept out like a storm, mercilessly slapping toward Chunzong's face. If he was hit by the slap, it would be more humiliating than being defeated. Chunzong naturally wouldn't be hit by the slap. His figure flashed, and he calmly avoided the slap. Immediately, he rushed forward and flew away as fast as a flowing light. He was approaching. Zhong Feihong's eyes flashed. He didn't expect his slap to hit Chunzong. With a wave of his right hand, a dazzling jade-white sword light suddenly shot out from the scabbard. The sword chi surged and turned into a cloud that was vast and mighty, but also like a meteor breaking through the sky. It blasted forward and stabbed toward Chunzong without mercy. This was a battle of life and death. Whoever showed mercy would die, even though one would be reborn after death. And it wasn't a real death. The experience was the same as a real death. Who would be willing to suffer so many deaths and feel the horror of falling into eternal darkness? Chunzong's eyes narrowed slightly. Light condensed in his eyes as if he could see through everything. He unsheathed his sword and released a terrifying power that instantly blasted toward Zhong Feihong. The power of the 13th level of the Taiyuan cloud-shattering technique was extraordinary, and so was the power of the 90% half-step sword intent. The sword light collided, and both sides shook before shattering. Zhong Feihong's sword followed the trajectory and attacked. The sword light was like a starry sky, and the tip of the sword trembled. Every sword strike was so sharp that it seemed to be able to shatter everything. It enveloped every part of Chunzong's body, as if it was everywhere. Heart domain. Chunzong immediately grasped the trajectory of all the sword light and saw it clearly. He moved his feet and dodged one sword after another. Suddenly, Li Han's eyes narrowed and emitted a cold light, because in those steps, there was a trace of the mystery of his own footwork. It seemed to be the same, but wasn't. Was it a coincidence? Or did he comprehend it in the battle just now? Li Han believed it was the former, but he still felt unhappy. Boundless Blood Sea. With a sword, the blood light spread like wild waves, surging and surging in all directions. Immediately, it counterattacked and drowned Zhong Feihong. Zhong Feihong's sword suddenly emitted an incomparable light. Balls of rolling light bloomed like a cluster of flowers, enveloping all directions and forcibly pushing the blood-colored waves away. Countless jade-white sword light converged into a majestic ray. It pierced through the blood sea like a heavenly light and blasted toward Chunzong with unparalleled power. Extreme Heart Sword Style. In an instant, Chunzong also displayed his strongest sword style. The golden sword light was small. Compared to the majestic jade-white sword light, it was like a puppy compared to an elephant. However, it was an extremely terrifying puppy that could bite a ferocious beast to death. In an instant, the golden sword light pierced through the jade-white sword light and attacked with irresistible force. Zhong Feihong was shocked and hurriedly dodged to the side. A few strands of his hair were cut and turned into powder. The terrifying sword momentum roared in his ears. His whole head buzzed as if it was hit by a huge force. He felt a little dizzy. The momentum of the 150 kilograms giant sword was too terrifying. It gave people a feeling that they would die if they touched it and be injured if they brushed against it. This was a rare opportunity. Chunzong attacked again with the extreme heart sword style. Zhong Feihong's strength was obviously not as good as Li Han's. Under the dizzy state, although he instantly woke up and reacted, he was still a little slower. This little bit was enough to determine the outcome and reverse life and death. Boom! Chapter 1447. Chunzong won. 2 victory points. It wasn't that Chunzong was too strong, but that his opponents weren't strong enough. If it was an opponent like Li Han, Chunzong knew that he wouldn't be able to defeat him. However, Chunzong still gained something from the battle with Zhong Feihong. After returning to the Lotus platform, he continued to meditate and improve himself further. Now that his strength had increased to such a level, unless he made a breakthrough, it would not be easy for him to improve himself further. Every little bit of improvement was like taking a step further from the top of the pole. It was extremely difficult and required a lot of mental and physical effort. However, it was all worth it. The more perfect his foundation was, the more benefits he would get after breaking through. The battles continued without rest. Every battle was a battle of life and death. None of the geniuses showed any mercy when they attacked. Su Mubai defeated another opponent and obtained 2 victory points. He had accumulated 4 victory points. However, this was only the beginning of the Xianyuan sacred battle. There were still many battles to come. Only by winning all of them would one be able to get first place. Through these 2 battles, everyone could clearly see who was the stronger one. Just like what Chunzong knew, Yang Quan, He Yinzai, Yi Chundao, and Feng Yinyin, the strength of these 4 people was truly terrifying. They easily defeated their opponents and played it down. Obviously, they did not display much strength. In addition, there were some who were also terrifyingly strong. For example, Chu Zhongyang. Chunzong didn't know much about him, but he could hear from others that Chu Zhongyang was the #1 genius of the royal Chu clan. No one could compare to him. He was also known as the #1 genius of the younger generation of the Xianyuan dynasty. #1 genius of the younger generation. What a shocking title. It was a supreme honor. However, at the same time, one had to bear the weight of it. If one didn't have the ability to call himself the #1 genius of the younger generation, not only would it not bring any benefits, but it would also burden him. Not only was Chu Zhongyang not burdened, he was even better because he had enough strength and ability to bear the title. Of course, there were also many people who weren't convinced. For example, those peerless geniuses wanted to defeat Chu Zhongyang personally and take the title. The Xianyuan sacred battle was a life and death battle. It was an excellent opportunity. Whether it was the strength of Yang Quan and the others, or the strength of Chu Zhongyang and the other peerless geniuses, all of them made Chunzong wary. They were strong, too strong. He was no match for them now. Soon, Chunzong's 3rd battle began. His opponent was from Mingyuan Dao. This opponent was not weak, but he was no match for Chunzong. After a fierce battle, Chunzong pierced through his body with the extreme heart swordsmanship, blowing up half of his body and killing him instantly. Chunzong won. His winning points were 4. The 4th round, the 5th round, the 6th round. In these 3 matches, Chunzong won 2 and lost 1. The reason he lost the match was not because Chunzong was weak, but because his opponent was too strong. It was Zhong Tianlin, the second genius of the Zhong clan. His strength was not inferior to Li Han's. Moreover, his character was different from Li Han's. He did not give Chunzong any chance and directly used his killing move. Chunzong tried his best to fight, but he was defeated after only a few moves, but he also gained something. Breakthrough. On the 12-petal lotus platform, Chunzong's eyes flashed. He shouted in a low voice that only he could hear. His heart domain spread out and covered an 8-meter radius, isolating all his aura. The battle on the 36-petal giant lotus platform became more and more fierce, attracting everyone's attention. No one paid attention to Chunzong at this moment. In his mind, countless sword lights were flying in all directions and surging in the sky. Every sword light was astonishingly sharp, as if it could tear the world apart. Supreme will condensation. Countless insights emerged. Half-step sword intent. Breakthrough. After many life and death battles, 2 reincarnations of life and death, and many battles that brought out his potential, the half-step sword intent finally ushered in a breakthrough. 90% to 100%. Chunzong only felt that the half-step sword intent was constantly condensing and becoming sharper, like a sword embryo being sharpened. If the half-step sword intent at 90% and below were described as a rough embryo, then the half-step sword intent at 100% was a forged sword being sharpened. A rough embryo and a forged sword were 2 completely different levels. When the half-step sword intent broke through to 100%, countless mysteries emerged one after another, making Chunzong forget himself and completely immerse himself in comprehending. Under the cover of the heart domain, Chunzong's breakthrough did not leak out any aura. Of course, there were still experts who noticed it, but only a few. This boy is really extraordinary. One of the few experts who noticed Chunzong's change nodded secretly. Indeed, he has great potential and is worth cultivating. If he could have been born in the capital, his strength would be even higher now. These top experts all gave Chunzong great affirmation. The battle was still going on, and Chunzong was also immersed in the mystery of the half-step sword intent. 50%. After the half-step sword intent broke through from 90% to 100%, the increase was indeed 50%, but it was not as simple as 50%. The 50% increase was just a basic increase. In addition, the sharpness was further improved, just like the sharpening of the sword embryo. Under such superposition, the increase was more than 50%. In addition, there was a third point. The half-step sword intent was the half-step heart sword principle intent, which was closely related to one's mind. 100% meant perfection. Perfection. It meant completeness. It was more compatible with one's mind, as if there were no flaws. This kind of improvement was not something that could be described with a simple 50% increase. Chunzong was looking forward to the next battle. He hoped that the next opponent would be strong enough so that he could test the power of the half-step sword intent. This was the perfection of the half-step sword intent. Chunzong was not in a hurry, as his battle had not come yet. He continued to watch the battle, imagining himself fighting fiercely with the 2 peerless geniuses on the giant lotus platform. He wanted to hone himself and the application of the half-step sword intent in this way. As the battle went on one after another, finally, it was Chunzong's turn again. Chunzong was a little surprised by his opponent this time. Zhao Xinkong. Zhao Xinkong was the second strongest genius in the Mountain Flow Mansion. He had once fought with Su Mubai and was defeated by Su Mubai. There was no doubt that his strength was very strong. When Chunzong first arrived at the Mountain Flow Mansion, he felt a lot of pressure when he saw Zhao Xinkong. He knew that he was no match for Zhao Xingkong. However, with each battle, his strength had unknowingly improved. Compared to when he first arrived at the Mountain Flow Mansion, his current strength had improved a lot. Facing Zhao Xingkong, Chunzong was not afraid at all, because at this moment, he might be able to defeat Zhao Xingkong. "It's your misfortune to have met me." Zhao Xingkong was slightly surprised, but then he sneered. The people from a mysterious nether territory came to the Mountain Flow Mansion to participate in the prefecture competition and took the quota that originally belonged to the Mountain Flow Mansion. This made Zhao Xingkong very unhappy, and Su Mubai, who had defeated him before, was among them. At the prefecture competition, he had declared that the people from the mysterious nether territory would not get more than 3 quotas. In the end, he was slapped in the face. After that, Chunzong also got a quota in the prefecture competition. All in all, one thing after another piled up, making Zhao Xingkong increasingly unhappy. Now that he was facing off against Chunzong, the anger in his heart burst out immediately. "Maybe it's your misfortune," Chunzong said with a smile. "Then let's see." Zhao Xingkong sneered, and his eyes became even colder. His shoulders shook slightly, as if he was walking in a void. He looked slow, but in fact he was extremely fast. In an instant, he crossed hundreds of meters and silently approached Chunzong. He flicked his finger, piercing through the air, and pointed at Chunzong's glabella. As soon as he made his move, Chunzong felt that Zhao Xingkong was extraordinary. This was different from the feeling of watching a battle. Even if he simulated it, he could not completely simulate it. This finger was very mysterious. Silently, it seemed to penetrate through the void gap. It was as light and sharp as a sword, as fierce and overbearing as a spear. It was unique and mysterious. If it was Chunzong in the past, it would be difficult for him to deal with it. But now, Chunzong instantly grasped its trajectory and a trace of its mystery. Dodge, counterattack. The power of the Gilded Mountain Sword was so powerful that it made Zhao Xingkong's heart tremble unconsciously. He had a feeling that he was going to be smashed into pieces. It was very terrifying. Void Finger. First, Zhao Xingkong's figure flashed and avoided Chunzong's sword. At the same time, he looked cold and solemn and shouted in a low voice. His heavy voice echoed in the void. Immediately, he pointed his finger, which was shining with a light of nothingness. This finger pierced through the void and seemed to merge into the void. It was silent, and even the fluctuation of its aura was completely restrained. Chunzong could not detect or capture its trajectory. Realm of Heart. The 8-meter Realm of Heart was released, covering all directions. Immediately, Chunzong captured the trajectory of his opponent's finger. It was just that the trajectory was a little light. The void finger that Zhao Xingkong cultivated was an incomplete superior saint-class martial technique. It was very unfathomable. This finger was also the first move of the void finger. Taiyuan Cloud-Scraping Finger. Chunzong did not use his sword this time. Instead, he raised his left hand and pointed. Taiyuan Cloud-Scraping Finger. This was a superior saint-class martial technique that went with the Taiyuan Cloud-Scraping skill. Chunzong also spent some time and energy on it, but it was not his main cultivation. However, because of the memory of Lord Taiyuan, the difficulty of cultivating the Taiyuan Cloud-Scraping Finger was not very high. At least, it was much easier than the blood drop swordsmanship. The breakthrough of the half-step sword essence had led to the improvement of all aspects. Unexpectedly, the Taiyuan Cloud-Scraping Finger also had a breakthrough and was close to the profound realm. Its power was even more powerful. How dare you use a finger technique? Zhao Xingkong's face darkened. He felt humiliated. Chunzong practiced swordsmanship. This was completely obvious. There was no doubt about it. However, at this moment, he used a finger technique to deal with him. Obviously, he did not take him seriously. How could Zhao Xingkong not be angry? In anger, Zhao Xingkong directly changed the first move of the void finger into the second move. In an instant, the trajectory became erratic, as if it had escaped from Chunzong's grasp. It seemed to be coming from the front, but it also seemed to be coming from the side. It became more and more terrifying. Chunzong looked dignified. He still pointed his finger. Under that finger, there seemed to be a sea of clouds following. The vortex flowed backward, the wind rose, and the clouds moved. The momentum was vast and fierce, pushing the power of the Taiyuan cloud-scraping finger to the extreme. This finger seemed to come from the sky, carrying the vastness of the sky and the majesty of the clouds. Its power was extremely shocking. It did not hold back at all. Chapter 1448. Boom! It sounded like a thunderclap. The two fingers collided and paused for a moment. Then, a terrifying power burst out. The power shook all directions. Circles of ripples spread out continuously as if they were going to shatter the void. Chunzong only felt an indescribable power penetrating his finger strength and trying to destroy his fingers. Fortunately, Chunzong sensed it in an instant. He immediately released a vigorous and overbearing power to resist it. Then, he quickly pointed his finger and the sword in his right hand blasted out. Zhao Xinkong was shocked, as if he was going to be smashed by the sword. He quickly retreated. His body seemed to disappear into the void. It was faintly discernible and extremely light. Zhao Xinkong paused and performed the void finger to the extreme. The third move, he pointed out a finger. There was no finger strength, but Chunzong was terrified. The terrifying power of that finger shuttled through the void. Under the heart domain, Chunzong was shocked to find that he could not really capture the trajectory of that finger. It was mysterious and unpredictable. If not for his heart domain enveloping the area, allowing him to grasp the vague fluctuations, he would have been struck. Avoiding Zhao Xinkong's finger, Chunzong's figure kept changing. He performed the illusory net 9 changes to the extreme. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. The 4 figures approached Zhao Xinkong from 4 directions. 4 sword lights blasted out as if they were shattering the void. The shocking sword pressure pressed down, making Zhao Xinkong feel suffocated. His face became more and more dignified. There was a trace of cold light in the depths of his eyes. It seemed to be rotating like a vortex, swallowing everything. The void finger, the 4th move. This move was the strongest move that Zhao Xinkong had mastered so far. As he pointed out his finger, the finger seemed to be unable to withstand the overly powerful force and trembled slightly. Traces of faintly discernible aura lingered around it, causing the finger to become increasingly transparent, as though it was truly about to merge into the void. Chunzong suddenly felt his hair stand on end. He felt that there was a terrifying finger strength shooting out from all directions. It was as if his body was going to be riddled with holes. Under the perception of the heart domain, there was a series of invisible finger strength around him. Every finger strength was as sharp as a sword and as domineering as a spear. It was so powerful that it could easily penetrate his body and render all his defenses useless. In the face of danger, Chunzong's illusory net 9 changes had a breakthrough again. 5 figures appeared instantly. 4 of them were penetrated and turned into nothingness. The last one was Chunzong's real body, which avoided Zhao Xinkong's finger. If it was not for the breakthrough of the illusory net 9 changes, Chunzong would not be able to avoid Zhao Xinkong's finger. Extreme Heart Sword Technique. A sword pierced through the air. The golden sword light was extremely condensed. This move was made with a 90% half-step sword essence. Zhao Xinkong had already seen Chunzong's move. The moment Chunzong used it, he had already used his body movement to escape into the void. As a result, Chunzong's sword missed. Child's play. I've already seen through it. Zhao Xinkong's voice seemed to come from all directions. It was as if his whole body had merged into the void and was difficult to catch. When Chunzong's eyes opened and closed, a trace of extremely sharp light pierced through the void and stared at Zhao Xinkong. Then he attacked again. Half-step sword essence. This move was the ultimate move. Under the effect of the half-step sword essence, regardless of the power, the speed of the sword was at least 30% faster than the previous move. Moreover, Zhao Xingkong found that he could not dodge this move. It seemed that there was no way to break this move. The sword seemed to pierce through the void. Zhao Xingkong exerted all his strength to resist, but he found that all his defenses were penetrated in an instant. It seemed extremely fragile, like a thin piece of paper. His head was suddenly smashed by the sword and disappeared completely. The corpse fell and disappeared immediately. Zhao Xingkong's body reappeared on the 12-petal lotus platform. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of fear. He had been killed in the previous battle, but it felt different. Just now, Chenzong killed him by smashing his head with a sword. That feeling was so horrible that it almost left a psychological shadow in Zhao Xingkong's heart. Death was only a result, but there were many processes. Different processes led to different experiences. Of course, the experience of death was not pleasant, but there were also differences in strength. Being smashed in the head was definitely a very bad experience. Those who were not strong-willed enough would have a psychological shadow and become an inner demon. Although Zhao Xingkong withstood it and did not have a psychological shadow, he was still very unhappy and even had a trace of killing intent. At the same time, a trace of fear grew in the depths of his heart. In just a short period of time, this person's strength had gone from being inferior to his to being able to defeat him. This strength was even stronger than Su Mubai's. Of course, the current Su Mubai was definitely stronger than before. Even so, Su Mubai could not help but look at Chenzong a few more times. Chenzong did not pay attention to any of the gazes. He was immersed in the sword move just now. The Extreme Heart sword style activated by the half-step sword essence was indeed very different from the half-step sword essence activated by the half-step sword essence. Not only was the speed of the sword increased, but it was also more complete and had fewer flaws. It was closer to perfection and became more complete. The feeling of the sword arriving with just a thought made Chenzong even more intoxicated. The profundity of the half-step sword essence was even deeper than he had imagined. It was even more worth uncovering. A thought suddenly appeared in Chenzong's mind. It seemed that the half-step Dao intent reaching the half-step Dao intent was the true beginning, or rather the beginning. On the basis of the half-step Dao intent, one could dig deeper and unearth even more potential. Currently, he was only at the beginning of the half-step sword essence. He had not excavated it to the limit. Only when he excavated it to the limit would he have a chance of breaking through and becoming the true Dao intent of the heart sword. At that time, it would be a transformation, a difference of heaven and earth. The battle continued, but Chenzong was immersed in his own comprehension. After 3 consecutive battles, his comprehension finally ended. Only then did he have the mind to watch the others' battles. Every battle was a form of tempering and sharpening the sword. Some battles were extremely intense because the strength of the combatants was close. However, some battles ended very quickly because the difference in strength between the combatants was obvious. This battle was Su Mubai's battle, and Su Mubai's opponent was Li Han, who had defeated Chenzong earlier. Chenzong's eyes shone brightly. Chenzong had no idea how strong Su Mubai was. After all, Su Mubai had not used his full strength when he fought earlier. Li Han was once Chenzong's opponent and had defeated him. He was also very strong. Both of their strengths were terrifying. If they fought, Chenzong might be able to see their full strength. Chenzong had not fought with Su Mubai yet, but it was only a matter of time. Only by understanding his full strength would he be able to deal with him better. As for Li Han, Chenzong had already fought with him and lost. However, Chenzong was able to learn something by observing Li Han's movements. Li Han's profound footwork had played a part in the breakthrough of the illusory Net 9 transformations. Su Mubai was a strong opponent, and Li Han did not underestimate him at all. He used his full strength as soon as he attacked. The blade light appeared out of nowhere. It was cold and sharp, and it seemed to split the sky. The speed of the blade was shocking. It was like a streak of light in the sky, crossing hundreds of meters in an instant. That blade caused Su Mubai's pupils to shrink. After that, Su Mubai's figure didn't move, yet his shoulders seemed to shake slightly, and a pure black palm had already torn through the sky and blasted out. The palm was powerful, yet it seemed to be slightly ethereal and light, and its trajectory was difficult to determine. In practically an instant, it avoided the wisp of extremely ghastly blade light and blasted towards Li Han, who approached him. This palm print caused Li Han's pupils to shrink. He felt as if the space around him was being pulled and suppressed, as if it was going to imprison him. Slash! The long blade slashed out. The blade light was peerless, and it instantly split the black palm print. It surged through the sky like cold lightning, and it was as if the 9 heavens had struck down with ice and thunder. Su Mubai's body was split apart by the blade. However, it was only an afterimage. It was unknown when the afterimage was left behind, but the real body had already appeared on the other side, as if it had appeared out of thin air. This application was even more brilliant than Zhao Xinkong's, causing Zhao Xinkong's pupils to shrink to the size of needles. Strong. Zhao Xinkong discovered that he actually felt as if he could not see through Su Mubai. There seemed to be a voice in the bottom of his heart telling him that when he had lost to Su Mubai that day, he had originally thought that he would be able to wash away his humiliation and defeat Su Mubai after becoming stronger. He did not expect Su Mubai to be even more unfathomable. Zhao Xinkong no longer had any confidence in defeating Su Mubai, even though they had yet to fight. Chen Zong's pupils shrank slightly. He actually could not see through Su Mubai's technique, which seemed to be walking through thin air. If he could not see through Su Mubai's technique, it would be difficult to deal with him, and he would be defeated sooner or later. Su Mubai's technique was indeed extraordinary. He was a formidable opponent. Even if Chen Zong comprehended his half-step sword intent to 100%, he was not confident that he could defeat Su Mubai. However, the final outcome would only be known after the battle. Right now, Chen Zong could only watch the battle wholeheartedly and try his best to see through Su Mubai's strength. Only then would he be more confident when he fought against Su Mubai. Su Mubai seemed to be walking through thin air. Compared to Zhao Xinkong, he seemed even more ethereal. His movements were erratic and hard to grasp, making it difficult for Li Han to grasp his saber. The saber in Li Han's hand pulsed with an extremely cold saber light. The saber light was shocking. Every time it pulsed, it seemed to cut through space, leaving behind a faint saber mark. Without taking any stance, Li Han slashed out with his saber. The saber light was like cold lightning, tearing through the sky and splitting Su Mubai in two. However, it was just an afterimage. Li Han's expression was ice cold, and his gaze was shockingly cold. It was as if the saber light could penetrate everything. Countless saber lights shot out in all directions. From afar, it looked like a cold flower that had bloomed. The petals were the countless cold saber lights. Suddenly, the countless saber lights gathered in the middle like petals closing. They condensed into a majestic saber light that slashed down. Under this saber, nothing could hide. The shocking saber pressure pressed down in all directions. The space of the entire Lotus platform was suppressed, making it impossible for Su Mubai to pass through the spatial crack. He was forced to show himself. Chapter 1449. The saber light was majestic, mighty, and boundless. Su Mubai had nowhere to hide when the saber struck. He could only take the attack head-on. Su Mubai appeared on the Lotus platform. His eyes emitted a pitch-black light. Amidst the darkness, there was a faintly discernible whiteness that rippled like water. Su Mubai actually gave Chen Zong a bone-chilling feeling. He could not see through him. He reached out with one hand. His palm was pitch-black as though it was absorbing all light. There was also a bit of whiteness spreading out from his hand. It looked as though the pitch-black hand had turned white. Hand of the Void. He reached out with one hand and grabbed the majestic saber light. They were in a stalemate. The saber light was mighty, domineering, and extremely cold. It was about to shatter the Hand of the Void. However, the Hand of the Void was incomparably tough. The power in its hand fluctuated endlessly, and it continuously dissolved the power of the saber light. Crack! There seemed to be the sound of something shattering. The majestic saber light was broken by Su Mubai's hand of the void and shattered. Chunzong could see a trace of astonishment flashing across Li Han's face. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that his extremely tyrannical saber would actually be broken by his opponent in such a manner. The hand of the void seemed to be alternating between black and white. After shattering the saber light, it mercilessly slammed toward Li Han. The terrifying palm pressure suppressed the surrounding space. Even the void was suppressed. The shocking pressure surged from all directions, causing Li Han's body to stop. He was like a turtle in a jar, unable to dodge. He unleashed all his power. The saber light was as dazzling as the sun. He suddenly slashed out, wanting to break through the pressure and restraint. Li Han was undoubtedly very powerful. When his saber slashed down, its power was extremely terrifying. It forcefully slashed apart the shocking pressure around him. However, it was too late. Su Mubai's hand of the void had already arrived. The void shook and collapsed. Countless terrifying waves of power bombarded Li Han's body, causing him to spit out blood. In the end, he could not take it anymore, and his body was torn into pieces. This move caused the pupils of many exceptional sky prides to shrink. Chunzong was shocked. I can't take it. If it were him, he would not have been able to withstand Su Mubai's attack. This was a feeling that came from the depths of his heart. The power of that attack was simply too tyrannical. There was no way to defend against it. Chunzong's heart sank a little, but his mind was racing like lightning, constantly thinking of a way to solve the problem. Li Han's body shattered and died under Su Mubai's attack. He was defeated, and Su Mubai obtained 2 more victory points. He had yet to lose a single battle. Young Master Xianming from the Xianming territory was indeed extraordinary. The duels continued, match after match, round after round. Chunzong had already fought 20 battles. In these 20 battles, his opponents were both strong and weak. The strong ones were able to kill him, such as Li Han. The weak ones were not a match for him and were killed by him. In the 20 deathmatch matches, Chunzong lost 3 and won 17, accumulating 35 victory points. In the 21st round, Chunzong appeared on the giant lotus platform. The person who appeared in front of him made Chunzong's pupils shrink to the size of needles, but there was also a trace of excitement in his eyes. Yi Chen said, "The Heavenly Sword King Yi Chen, the #1 genius from the Heavenly Cloud sect in the Heavenly Cloud state. This person had an amazing record of slaying a saint, so his strength was terrifying. Moreover, not only was he strong, but he also used a sword. He was undoubtedly an excellent opponent." Chunzong had also seen Yi Chen's previous attacks. He knew that this person was very strong and his swordsmanship was brilliant. However, he probably did not use his full strength before, so he did not know the depth of his strength. In any case, to be able to slay a saint, even if it was the most ordinary First Heaven Saint realm early stage, his strength was terrifying. Moreover, that was before. Now, he might be even stronger. Yi Chen's strength was definitely not inferior to Li Han's. Yi Chen opened his eyes slightly and stared at Chunzong. His eyes were extremely bright, as if they were shining, condensing into a sharp sword light that directly pierced through the sky, as if it was going to pierce Chunzong's eyes. Chunzong's pupils shrank unconsciously, as if they were pierced. Sharp, fierce, sharp. There was also a trace of indescribable coercion. Chunzong was secretly in awe. The alarm bell rang, but there was even a trace of battle intent growing in him. It turned into a sharp sword intent that shot out through his eyes. He looked at Yi Chindao without fear. His gaze was like an invisible sword aura that touched and collided in the air, as if there was an invisible force and sparks sputtering. "Draw your sword." Yi Chen was a little surprised. He immediately restrained the light in his eyes and said lightly, but there was a trace of disdain in his tone, as if he was examining Chunzong to see if he was qualified to draw his sword and show his true strength. Chunzong was not angry at his opponent's arrogant attitude, nor did he feel unhappy. The gilded mountain sword was unsheathed in an instant, and the sword pierced through the sky. The sword light surged, vast and overbearing. The terrifying power seemed to shatter the sky, and its power was even more shocking. The sword pressure of this sword was vigorous and overbearing, as if it was going to shatter Yi Chen's body. Yi Chen did not move at all, as if he did not notice anything. He did not move until the sword was about to hit him. He did not dodge, but just pointed his finger. The finger was like a sword piercing the sky, carrying some kind of inexplicable power, as if it came from the sky. The sword was mighty, followed by the wind and clouds. The power of heaven spread and went straight to the mind, which made Chen Zong's heart tremble slightly. However, Chen Zong's mind and willpower were so strong that this little impact could not affect him at all. The sword still shot out, as if it was going to shatter Yi Chen's body. This sword was integrated with the half-step sword intent, and its power was extraordinary. Yi Chen was very strong, but he could not ignore this sword. As a sword cultivator, most of his strength was in the sword. Although it was powerful to replace the sword with a finger, it also depended on who the opponent was. The sword was unsheathed, and a beam of sword light seemed to come from the sky with the magnificent power of heaven. There was no way to dodge. The sword was like the wrath of heaven and the judgment of heaven. The overbearing power rushed straight to the mind, and it was more than 10 times stronger than before. It rushed straight to Chen Zong's mind and willpower, as if it was going to shatter it. Chen Zong vaguely saw an ancient giant full of majesty standing between heaven and earth. Its body was full of unparalleled power and pressure, and it was high and boundless. The giant seemed to be a sky giant, and the sword seemed to be a random finger of the sky giant. In an instant, the sword light was shattered, and the terrible blow came as if it was going to shatter heaven and earth, suppressing Chen Zong. The light and shadow flickered and shone in all directions, binding Chen Zong's body and making him feel like he was going to be crushed. Blood explosion. The overbearing sword shot out, and the blood light surged and exploded. There was still a feeling of being suppressed, but Chen Zong's soul was strong, and his willpower was strong. He resisted the impact of the sword, which was like the power of heaven, and completely resisted the sword. Yi Chendao's eyes flashed, and he was a little surprised. His swordsmanship had already reached a very high level. Every sword was accompanied by the impact of heaven's willpower, which was enough to make it difficult for the opponent to resist. The opponents he had killed before were unable to completely resist the impact of heaven's willpower in his sword, so their minds were restrained, and their strength was reduced a little. That was why they were killed. His experience of going against the odds to enter the Saint Realm was also inseparable from this point. But he did not expect the opponent's willpower to be so strong that it could completely resist the impact of heaven's willpower in his swordsmanship. It was a little unbelievable. It seemed that he had to go all out. Yi Chendao also felt a little excited. So far in the 20 battles, he had not met a strong opponent who could make him go all out. In fact, he was also eager to fight with a strong opponent. He wanted to use his full strength to fight to his heart's content, so that he could better stimulate his own potential. He originally thought that the opponent in front of him would be defeated by him in a few moves like his previous opponents, but he did not expect it to be so unexpected. The Heavenly Cloud Cult had its own treasure book, and one of the sword techniques was the best of the saint level, and it was complete. Yi Chendao was practicing that sword technique. It was called the Heavenly Cloud Haoming Sword. Naturally, with Yi Chendao's current ability, he was unable to cultivate the Heavenly Cloud's Great Darkness sword to perfection. He hadn't even reached the Great Accomplishment stage. He could only barely reach the Small Accomplishment stage, but its power was already very shocking. The sword just now was the starting move of the Heavenly Cloud Haoming Sword, or it could be said that it was the basic move. Now, the sword was the real Heavenly Cloud Haoming Sword. When the sword was slashed out, the heavenly clouds were mighty, and there were countless mysteries in the air. The shocking will of heaven's willpower descended again. The giant in the sky appeared again, and compared to before, it was more solid, but it was difficult for others to see it. Only Chen Zong could see it clearly. The giant's gaze was fixed downward, and its eyes were vast, like the sea of clouds that was constantly fluctuating, as if it wanted to absorb Chunzong, and an indescribable aura spread out. Mighty heaven's might, endless heaven's might. Yi Chendao's sword was like the giant's finger pointing down. It was no longer a casual move, but a deliberate one, and its power was much stronger than before. The heavenly cloud-hounding sword of the heavenly cloud cult is indeed extraordinary. A top powerhouse secretly nodded and said, "The heavenly cloud cult was a big sect in the heavenly cloud state, and in the entire Xianyuan dynasty, it was not a weak sect. The heavenly cloud-hounding sword was the best of the saint level, and any complete best of the saint level was amazing. It should be known that even the most powerful Chu clan with the surname Wang had the best martial arts of the saint level. Endless blood sea. Chunzong exerted all his strength, and the endless blood sea under the influence of the half-step sword was even more powerful. The blood light spread out, and like a tide, it swept in all directions and shook the heavens and the earth. It was like a sea of blood was surging endlessly, and it was even more shocking than before. It spread out and flooded in all directions, and it was about to swallow Yi Chendao's body. Illusory net 9 changes. In the blink of an eye, the 5 figures dispersed and surrounded Yi Chendao from 5 directions. Extreme Heart Sword Style. A sword pierced through the air, and the speed of the sword was indescribably fast. Chapter 1450. This sword was a sure kill sword. Unexpectedly, it missed. A vast and mighty sword light bloomed in front of him. The white clouds were like the flowing clouds of the heavens. It swept across the sky and earth, filling the whole world. The 4th level of the heavenly clouds, great darkness sword. Vast heavenly clouds. This sword was like the collapse of the heavens. It was as if a giant in the heavens had turned into 5 fingers and struck down. It was vast and boundless. Chunzong had no way to dodge. Even the thought of resisting was suppressed to the lowest level. It seemed that he could only wait in place for this attack to strike down and kill him. Chunzong's pupils shrank to the size of needles. He only felt that the vast and mighty will of the heavens was bombarding down as if it was suppressing all living things in the world. It went straight to his mind and wanted to destroy it. Fortunately, Chunzong's mind and mind were far stronger than his peers. He was able to resist such an impact and quickly get rid of it. Heart Domain. Once the 8-meter Heart Domain was released, it weakened layer by layer, making the impact of the will of the heavens like a breeze. Chunzong's eyes narrowed slightly. Through the countless flowing clouds, he caught the sword light and also the figure behind the sword light. It was Yi Chendao's figure. Celestial crystal body. Extreme Heart Sword Style. This sword was fully activated without reservation. It pierced through the vast and mighty sword light of the heavenly clouds and pierced through, killing Yi Chendao. Yi Chendao was horrified. However, the 4th level of the heavenly clouds' great darkness sword was the highest level that he had mastered. He would not use it easily. If he used it, he would use all of his strength. Using all of his strength meant that it was extremely powerful. However, it also meant that it would be difficult to rotate as he wished as usual. There would be a slight difference. This slight difference could not be seen in the eyes of an ordinary opponent. However, it was obvious in the eyes of Powerhouse. At this moment, it was caught by Chunzong. It was difficult to dodge. Yi Chendao's mind turned and his eyes flashed with determination. Since he could not dodge, then he would not dodge. Let's see whose sword was stronger and who would kill who. He did not dodge or resist. He actually tried his best to rotate his sword and slashed at Chunzong. It was a suicidal move. Chunzong's all-out attack was flexible enough, but it was about to hit Yi Chendao. Yi Chendao's desperate attack was too sudden. If he wanted to, Chunzong could withdraw his sword and dodge it again. However, he was not 100% sure that he could dodge it. If he retracted his sword and tried to dodge, but was unable to completely avoid the attack, he would be heavily injured and his strength would be greatly reduced. He would not be a match for his opponent. In an instant, Chenzong also grasped Yi Chendao's decisiveness. Since that was the case, let's see who would live and who would die. Disregarding life and death, Chenzong's swords seemed to be even sharper. Resolute. The mutual destruction move attracted everyone's attention. Who would live and who would die in this sword? Life and death were related to victory and defeat. Chenzong's sword accurately pierced Yi Chendao's heart. The terrifying sword aura crushed Yi Chendao's heart and rushed in all directions, destroying his mind. At the same time, Chenzong tried his best to dodge, but he was still hit on the shoulder by Yi Chendao's heavenly clouds. His whole body was split in an instant. Both of their bodies disappeared at the same time and appeared on the 12-petal lotus platform. It was a suicidal move. It was a draw. Chenzong and Yi Chendao were both in a draw with 1 victory point each. Chenzong's victory points were 36. Yi Chendao's eyes were gloomy. This battle should not have been a draw. He should have won by killing his opponent. Unfortunately, his opponent was able to resist the impact of the heavenly will in his swordsmanship so well that the power of his swordsmanship was greatly reduced. The subtlety of the heavenly clouds' howling sword of the Saint Grade was that it condensed a trace of the heavenly will, as if it was enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. When facing it directly, one would feel the wrath of the heavens. If the impact of the heavenly will was resisted, the power of the swordsmanship itself would become ordinary, no different from Saint Grade upper-level sword technique. Facing Chenzong, Yi Chendao was fighting with a Saint Grade upper-level sword technique. The difference between a Saint Grade upper-level sword technique and a Saint Grade upper-level sword technique was obvious. When the advantage was gone, his strength would naturally be reduced. He could not defeat Chenzong and ended up in a mutual destruction draw. No matter how unwilling he was, it was useless. Sometimes, strength was not comprehensive. If one encountered a method that could restrain one's strength, one could be defeated by a stronger opponent. Yi Chendao's ability to enter the Saint Realm was also a kind of restraint. He took advantage of the weakness of his opponent's mind and will to defeat him. However, it was ineffective against Chenzong because Chenzong's soul was so strong that it was comparable to the Mastery Saint Realm. Although he was limited by his cultivation realm and could not fully develop it, the foundation was there. With such a foundation and countless life and death experiences, he gradually rose from a humble place like a mayfly to become strong. His experience was not comparable to Yi Chendao, who was born as a peerless prodigy. It was like refining real gold in fire, forging an unparalleled mind and will. Coupled with the soul fire and all other means, it was difficult to be invaded by external evil. The heavenly will was majestic and boundless, but in essence, it was also a kind of external evil. Naturally, it would be resisted. It had to be said that Yi Chendao, the heavenly sword king, was really aggrieved to meet Chenzong. If it were other opponents, it would not be so. Yi Chendao was the same as the others. He had long been defined as a first-tier peerless genius. Chenzong, on the other hand, was not included in the first tier. Previously, he was defined as a third-tier genius. But now, he was regarded more highly. In the hearts of a group of cultivators, he could be considered as a second-tier genius. Of course, such a definition was actually useless now. It was just a judgment in the hearts of the experts. For Chenzong, every battle was a tempering and could be improved. This was what made Chenzong different from others. The other peerless prodigies had almost reached the limit of their cultivation. It was very difficult for them to improve further. Even the Xinyuan Holy War could only stimulate some of their potential and improve slightly. Chenzong was different. From the beginning, Chenzong had not reached the limit of the half-saint level. There was still a lot of room for improvement. Therefore, such a battle was very beneficial for him. Chenzong was quite confident that after the Xinyuan sacred battle ended, no matter what his final ranking was, his strength would definitely improve by quite a bit. Fighting a life-and-death battle. Watching others fight a life-and-death battle. 22nd battle. 23rd battle. 24th battle. One battle after another went on. The exploration of the half-step sword essence deepened. Chunzong's sword became more and more harmonious and powerful. The battle went on. Chunzong won more than he lost. According to this situation, he might not be able to get into the top 10, but his ranking would not be too low. The higher his ranking, the more time he had to cultivate in the Xianyuan Holy Tower, and the greater the benefits. Yi Chendao's swordsmanship is indeed very powerful. It contains the impact of the heavenly will. After a battle, Chunzong would be enlightened and have a sudden idea. If his swordsmanship could also contain a strong impact of the heavenly will, wouldn't it be even more powerful? Although he thought about it, it was very difficult to do it. Chunzong had already given up on the Misty Rain Chaoyan sword technique. The Extreme Heart sword technique also carved out a path with its own advantages. So, he would think about it later. For now, the way to improve his strength was to further perfect the Extreme Heart swordsmanship and explore the potential of the half-step sword essence. If possible, his cultivation method should also be further improved. But no matter what, Chunzong knew that it would be very difficult. No matter how difficult it was, it could not stop him from moving forward. He had a fearless and sharp heart to pursue the Tao. In the 30th battle, Chunzong's opponent was very strong. It was a peerless genius from the Xian ancient path, named Qi Tian'ao. He was one of the top peerless geniuses in the Xian ancient path. Qi Tian'ao was a body cultivator. Qi Tian'ao's weapon was his body, his arms, and his fists. Chunzong had seen his fighting style before. It was very fierce, like an ancient savage beast. The power of each of his attacks was extremely terrifying. Moreover, Qi Tian'ao's physique was extremely strong, and his defensive power was terrifying. Boom! Boom! Qi Tian'ao launched his fists. Each of his fists was as strong as the mountains and the earth. Chunzong was struggling to cope with it. Too strong. The power of each of his punches was too strong. It was very difficult to deal with. Chunzong exerted his body movement to the extreme. He kept dodging and counterattacking with his sword. However, when the gilded mountain sword slashed on Qi Tian'ao's body, it was difficult to cause any damage. Disadvantage. Chunzong was obviously at a disadvantage. Qi Tian'ao's physique was too strong. It was difficult to resist. Chunzong retreated. Suppression. Chunzong was completely suppressed by Qi Tian'ao. However, Chunzong's toughness was also very amazing. He could withstand Qi Tian'ao's punches. Rumbling sounds reverberated in all directions, like the endless beating of heavenly drums. Every strike caused countless ripples, like a surging tide surging endlessly. The fist's strength was like a roaring dragon. Its power was unparalleled. The corners of Qi Tian'ao's mouth curled up in a cold smile. Suddenly, he threw out a punch. That punch was like the collapse of the sky and the earth. Chunzong only felt that the entire space was enveloped by that punch, and there was no way to dodge. It was as if he was being suppressed. An astonishing pressure pressed down from all directions, making Chunzong almost suffocate. This was an upright punch. It was a powerful and powerful punch. There was no technique involved. It was purely relying on brute force to suppress the opponent. Such a punch could not be avoided. It could only be faced head-on. Chunzong's face was cold. His eyes were shining. He immediately broke out all his strength. Celestial crystal body. Half-step sword essence. Heart realm. Extreme heart sword style. The reason why Chunzong did not borrow the power of his sure doppelganger was that he could not borrow it. He was suppressed by the power of the Lotus Throne, or rather, by the power of the Divine Mystery Palace. He could not use any power of the Saint Realm. Otherwise, some other peerless geniuses might have the means to borrow the power of the Saint Realm. It was obviously not good for the Xianyuan Holy War. One of the purposes of the Xianyuan Holy War was to further stimulate the potential of everyone. Naturally, it was better to use one's own strength. Even if it was a secret technique, it was closely related to one's cultivation. Chapter 1451. Shatter. Shatter. Everything turned to dust. Chunzong could clearly see and feel that his full-powered extreme heart sword style was crumbling inch by inch under that incomparably terrifying punch. That extremely terrifying power was only slightly weakened, and it continued on its way with irresistible force. His body also crumbled inch by inch under the terrifying blow and turned to dust. At that moment, Chunzong did not feel any pain. This showed that not only was the power of the punch extremely terrifying, but the force was also extremely fast. This kind of death could be called a kind of death, but in fact it was not a real death. It could only be regarded as a pseudo-death, because this kind of death only caused the body to shatter, the soul to remain. Therefore, after dying once or twice, everyone gradually adapted to it. Chunzong was a person who had truly experienced death. In an instant, Chunzong's soul flew back to the lotus throne, and a mysterious force was born from the 12-petaled lotus throne, quickly wrapping up Chunzong's soul and constructing a new body for him. This body was exactly the same as Chunzong's original body, and there was nothing wrong with it. However, this was not a real change of body. It was just a method that belonged to the mysterious God Palace. The real body still existed. It had not been changed, and it had not been truly destroyed. It was just that everyone's realm was not high enough, and their knowledge was not enough, so they did not understand the mysteries of this method. Even many Saint Realm Masters did not understand the mysteries of this method. Chunzong didn't feel dejected after losing this battle. It was very normal for someone to be stronger than him. He wasn't the favored child of this world, nor was he the child of the Heaven Tao. He'd only relied on some fortuitous encounters to be reborn and step onto the path of cultivation. Moreover, he'd relied on his own hard work to advance step by step, and he'd only arrived at this step after experiencing countless difficulties and obstacles. How difficult it was, and how much effort he had put into it, only he knew. Therefore, Chunzong never felt sorry for himself, and always worked hard to improve himself. This was also inseparable from the teachings of his papa when he was young. Each of the 108 people would have a life and death duel with the other 100 people. Chunzong defeated a few more opponents, and then he was defeated by others. Take He Yinza, for example. The power of his black flames was simply terrifying. Once he unleashed it, it would cover the entire sky and burn everything. It directly filled the entire lotus platform, leaving no place to hide. Compared to He Yanlin and He Yanming, he was much stronger. Chunzong fought with all his might, but he was still defeated in the end. Of course, Chunzong's strength was still a threat to He Yinza. Yang Quan's strength was also very terrifying. He was like a sun hanging high up in the sky, shining in all directions. Every strike was like a beam of light from the sun, blazing and tyrannical. However, both Yang Quan and He Yinza felt threatened by Chunzong. Therefore, they had to show their true strength. However, Chunzong felt that Chu Zhongyang, who was known as the #1 among the younger generation of the Xinyuan dynasty, was unfathomable. Chu Zhongyang stood quietly on the lotus platform with his hands behind his back. His body did not move at all. His eyes were indifferent. His gaze seemed to be fixed on Chunzong, but there was also a hint of emptiness in his eyes. It was as if he was looking into nothingness and did not care about anything in front of him. Supercilious. Nothing more than that. However, it seemed that Chu Zhongyang's attitude was normal. If it were someone else, they would be regarded as arrogant. Chu Zhongyang just stood there. He did not take the initiative to attack, nor did he speak. It seemed that as long as Chunzong did not move, he would not move. The stalemate continued. However, Chunzong had to move because a faint aura gradually spread out from Chu Zhongyang's body. The aura was very weak at first and was difficult to detect, but it gradually grew stronger. Chunzong's perception was amazingly sharp. He sensed it in advance and realized that if the stalemate continued, when the aura became stronger, it would be the end of the battle. At that time, he was afraid that he would not be able to resist. There was no reason. It was an intuition that came from his soul. And Chunzong always believed in his intuition. Attack. Not only did he have to attack, but he also had to attack mercilessly. Celestial crystal body. Heart realm. Half-step sword intent. After one fierce battle after another, Chunzong dug deeper into the potential of half-step sword intent. It became more powerful and sharp, and he operated it at will. Therefore, the power of this extreme heart swordsmanship was 30% stronger than before the sacred battle of Xinyuan. A 30% increase in power was naturally very shocking. However, the 30% increase in power of the extreme heart swordsmanship was still not a match for Chu Zhongyang. Chunzong attacked with all his strength. The speed of the sword seemed to surpass the speed of light. It was unbelievably fast. Chu Zhongyang seemed to have just noticed it. His hollow eyes turned slightly and condensed. In an instant, Chunzong felt that he had been seen through. It was as if all the secrets of his sword were no secret in his opponent's eyes. It was as if this sword was full of flaws. His opponent saw through it at a glance and targeted it. Chunzong felt that his belief was shaken in an instant, which made him feel incredulous. His belief had always been firm. This time, he actually felt shaken. Although it was not real shaken, it had never happened before. What kind of eyes were those? They were like the sky, vast and boundless, containing endless mysteries. They were also like the water in a well, reflecting the bright moon. In the next moment, Chu Zhongyang made a move and pointed a finger. The finger turned into a cold light with countless mysteries floating. It seemed fierce and domineering, yet gentle like a breeze. The finger directly pierced through the flaw of the extreme heart swordsmanship and penetrated Chunzong's forehead between his eyebrows. At that moment, Chunzong could see it clearly. Facing Chu Zhongyang, Chunzong did not have the power to resist. The gap between them was too big. Appearing on the 12-petal lotus platform, Chunzong was still absent-minded. He was not really absent-minded, but he was recalling Chu Zhongyang's finger. That finger contained two types of half-step Dao intent, Chunzong said to himself, his eyes flickering. Moreover, Chunzong had a feeling that the two types of half-step Dao intent were not at the first level. They were at least at the second level, and they had been comprehended to 100%. Thinking about the others, some were still trying hard to comprehend half-step Dao intent. Some had comprehended and grasped half-step Dao intent, but had not improved to 100%. Some had comprehended half-step Dao intent to 100%, but had only grasped one type. However, Chu Zhongyang had grasped two types of half-step Dao intent to 100%, and he had perfectly merged them together. Grasping multiple types of half-step Dao intent was one thing, but they had to be merged together to release a stronger power. In terms of comprehension of half-step Dao intent, it could be said that Chu Zhongyang had already surpassed many of his peers. Even Chunzong could not compare to him in this aspect. However, Chunzong would not belittle himself because of this. Others had other people's paths of cultivation, and he had his own path of cultivation. Constantly improving oneself was the foundation of cultivation. When one was born and stepped onto the path of cultivation, there had to be someone that was more brilliant and formidable than oneself. Otherwise, wouldn't one be too lonely and lonely at the top? Of those two types of half-step Dao intent, one should belong to the fire Dao intent, and the other should belong to the wind Dao intent, Chunzong thought to himself. Of course, he wasn't clear about the specifics. But what's going on with his eyes? Chunzong's eyes squinted slightly as he looked at Chu Zhongyang once more. Chu Zhongyang still had an appearance as if he was in a daze, and his eyes were empty. The life and death battle still continued, and Chunzong continued to comprehend. Even though he was quickly defeated in this battle, along with Chunzong's deep contemplation, his gains gradually increased. The potential of half-step sword intent was unearthed a step further. It was another battle, and this time, Chunzong's opponent was the Blazing Phoenix King, Feng Yinyan. When he saw Feng Yinyan that day, Chunzong knew that he wasn't a match for her, but now, that might not be the case. Boom! An extremely shocking flame suddenly exploded from Feng Yinyan's body, spreading out and burning fiercely. Faintly, one could hear an extremely resounding phoenix cry. At the beginning, Feng Yinyan didn't treat Qinzong as an opponent, but now she had no choice but to face him head-on, because the strength that Qinzong had displayed was very strong. Fight! Feng Yinyan's weapon was a sword, a phoenix wing sword. As she slashed out with her sword, the raging flames transformed into a flaming phoenix that rushed out. Its speed was shocking, and it was incomparably domineering. Even though she used a sword, Feng Yinyan didn't comprehend the sword Dao intent, but the fire Dao intent. Burn! 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 That terrifying flaming phoenix burned everything. Qinzong's eyes squinted as he slashed out with his sword. One had to admit that Feng Yinyan was not called the #1 genius of the Mountain Flow Prefecture for nothing. Her strength was very, very strong, and she made Qinzong fall into a bitter and fierce battle. Even compared to Yi Chun, Feng Yinyan's strength was not inferior. Fortunately, Qinzong's strength was constantly increasing, and he was much stronger than before. Phoenix cry of the 9 heavens. In a clear shout, accompanied by an extremely resounding cry, Feng Yinyan slashed down with her sword. It was as if a phoenix from the 9 heavens had fallen from the sky. The tip of the sword was the phoenix's mouth, extremely sharp and burning with raging flames. Qinzong raised his head and squinted his eyes. His pupils shrunk to the size of needles, and he slashed out with his sword. Extreme heart sword style. With a strong conviction, he slashed out with his sword without mercy. It was an extreme sword, a sure kill sword. This was the most powerful collision. The sword lights paused one after another, and then they pierced through everything. Qinzong's body was instantly engulfed by the raging flames in the sky, as if he was about to be burned into ashes. Feng Yinyan's body was also pierced through by the extreme heart sword style. A draw? No, Feng Yinyan was killed, but Qinzong was still alive, even though he looked very miserable, as if he was about to die. Qinzong won, and Feng Yinyan lost. The reason why Qinzong could win was because of the purple cloud black star flame and the mysterious ancient flame refining technique, which allowed him to better resist the burning of the flame to a certain extent. But no matter what, a loss was a loss, and Feng Yinyan could accept it. Until now, there were not many people who still had a complete victory. There were less than 10 out of the 108 geniuses. And it was certain that until the end of the battle, there would only be one person who could maintain a complete victory, and that person would be the champion of this Xianyuan Sage battle. Now it seemed that everyone had already guessed it. It was the #1 person among the younger generation of the Xianyuan dynasty, Chu Zhongyang. So far, no matter which opponent he faced, Chu Zhongyang did not seem to show any signs of using his full strength. He had easily suppressed and killed his opponents. It was another battle. This time, Qinzong's opponent made the experts of the Xianming territory cry out in surprise. Chapter 1452. Pitch black. Void white. For a moment, Qinzong couldn't tell what was going on. The light in his eyes rotated, as if the sun and moon were alternating. Su Mubai's expression was calm. He waved his hand, and palm prints fell from the sky one after another, like a torrential downpour. Qinzong attacked with his sword. The sword lights surged like lightning, and each of them was extremely ferocious, like a sky full of lightning. The sword light shattered under Su Mubai's palm prints, unable to pose any threat. Qinzong unleashed his full strength and used both the blood-dripping sword technique and the extreme heart sword style, but it didn't seem difficult for Su Mubai to deal with it. Then, Qinzong saw Su Mubai's eyes close and then open. His pupils seemed to turn white in an instant, like a vast expanse of sky clouds, and seemed to want to absorb Qinzong's soul. Qinzong's soul was powerful, and the effect on him was very weak. He instantly broke free and attacked with his sword. Then, not only did Su Mubai's pupils turn white, but the white around his pupils also turned pure black, as if it was absorbing all light. Qinzong felt his heart palpitate for no reason. Even with Qinzong's powerful soul, He couldn't completely resist this kind of palpitating feeling. It was very strange. For a moment, Chun Zong became absent-minded. For Su Mubai, this momentary absent-mindedness was enough. Even if it was only for 1/100th of a breath, it was enough for Su Mubai to attack with his palm. Void Hand. A large hand condensed in the air and grabbed at Chun Zong mercilessly as if it was trying to fish out the moon from the water. In 1/100th of a breath's time, Chun Zong reacted and immediately executed the illusory Luo 9 body transformation technique to dodge. The 5 figures were difficult to distinguish between real and fake, but under that void hand, it was as if there was no way to dodge. It was as if that space had already been enveloped by that huge hand, and there was nowhere to hide. Extreme Heart Sword Style. Yi Futian's most powerful sword attack was unleashed with determination and conviction. The hand that pierced through the void attacked Su Mubai as if it wanted to pierce through him. However, Su Mubai did not seem to notice it and did not have any intention of dodging. Bang! Chun Zong was hit by the void hand and immediately felt an extremely terrifying power. It was like a surging wave that continuously attacked him. Every time it hit him, it was as if it wanted to destroy his body. He tried his best to resist, but he couldn't completely resist it. His resistance collapsed under this terrifying and all-pervasive force, and his body was shattered. Death. Defeat. When Chun Zong reappeared on the 12-petal lotus platform, he was somewhat bewildered. Feng Yinyan had been defeated by him, but Su Mubai had defeated him. Chun Zong could feel that the difference in strength between him and Su Mubai was not small. Then, was it true that Su Mubai had defeated Zhao Shinkong by a small margin? If that was true, it could only mean that Su Mubai's strength had increased tremendously during this period of time. But whether it was true or not, Su Mubai became the second person that Chun Zong could not see through. The first one was Chu Zhongyang, who was known as the #1 person in the Xianyuan dynasty's younger generation. I wonder what the result of the battle between Su Mubai and Chu Zhongyang will be. Chun Zong wondered. In many people's eyes, Chu Zhongyang was undoubtedly the strongest. Chun Zong also thought so, but he changed his mind after the battle with Su Mubai. Su Mubai definitely didn't use his full strength in the battle with him. He still held back. As for how much he held back, Chun Zong didn't know. Chun Zong was looking forward to the battle between Su Mubai and Chu Zhongyang. What would happen? Chun Zong's question was answered not long after. Su Mubai and Chu Zhongyang faced each other on the huge 36-petaled lotus platform. Chu Zhongyang stared at Su Mubai. Su Mubai seemed to be very cautious. However, the two of them stood still and did not move at all. No one could see what they were doing clearly, and no one knew what they were doing. Could they be looking at each other? Staring? However, some people were able to see some mysteries. The two of them had different eyes. Su Mubai's pupils had turned white, while the whites of his eyes had turned black. The black and white seemed to be the opposite of each other. It was very frightening. Chu Zhongyang's eyes seemed to be empty, like the boundless sea of clouds in the sky, yet they also seemed to contain a boundless blazing sun. Both of their eyes were filled with mysteries. If I'm not wrong, this boy's eye should be the Void God Eye, a Peak Saint Realm expert said with uncertainty. It's the Void God Eye, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Its potential hasn't been fully stimulated. Another Peak Saint Realm expert nodded in affirmation. If the Void God Eye reaches major completion, it can see through the void with a single glance, and it can use the power of the void to crush people into powder. Although the Void God Eye is powerful, Chu Zhongyang's Heavenly Ancient Eye isn't bad either. That's right. Chu Zhongyang's Heavenly Ancient Eye is better than the Void God Eye. Su Mubai and Chu Zhongyang didn't seem to be fighting, standing still like two statues, but in reality, they were fighting with the Void God Eye and the Heavenly Ancient Eye. This was a deep confrontation that couldn't be seen clearly, making it difficult for others to understand the danger involved. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Time slowly passed, making it difficult for others to endure. They didn't know how the confrontation was going. If they fought, no matter how intense it was, they would be able to see something. Whether they were evenly matched or who had the upper hand and who was at a disadvantage, they would be able to see it. However, in this kind of confrontation, even a half-step great saint expert would find it difficult to see what was going on. After a quarter of an hour, the expressions of the two became more and more solemn. It seemed that this kind of confrontation wasn't easy and consumed a lot of energy. Suddenly, Su Mubai's expression changed slightly, and he grunted. His body swayed slightly, and he closed his eyes unconsciously. A trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his eyes and slowly flowed down. Chu Zhongyang seemed fine, but his face instantly turned pale. He seemed to have consumed a lot of energy. "You've won," Su Mubai said with his eyes closed. This confrontation ultimately ended with Su Mubai's defeat, but it seemed that Chu Zhongyang had also not won easily. This battle was not the final battle, but it was an extremely intense and eye-catching battle. Chunzong fought with Chu Tianlu again. In the world of the profound origin treasure scroll, Chu Tianlu had one of his ears shattered by Chunzong, and he harbored a grudge in his heart. If he had the slightest chance, he would definitely take revenge. Now, it was an excellent opportunity. Unfortunately, in the world of the profound origin treasure scroll, Chu Tianlu had suppressed Chunzong, but Chunzong was much stronger now. Chu Tianlu had used all his strength, but he was still no match for Chunzong. In the end, not only did Chu Tianlu fail to take revenge, he was suppressed by Chunzong and then killed. He died an extremely sullen death. As the battle continued, it was nearing its end. Chunzong won another battle. This was the final round. The end of this Xianyuan sacred battle made people want to continue fighting, but at the same time, it also made people feel relieved. After all, each round only had a quarter of an hour of rest. It was fine in the beginning, but as the battle went on, it felt very short and not enough. The intensity of the battle was too high. During the battle, one had to do his best. Even when there was no battle, one had to focus on the battles of others. One's entire body was in a tense state. Even if there was a short break, there was no real rest. It was a high-intensity battle. Chunzong knew that he would not be able to enter the top 10 in this battle. After all, there were as many as 17 people who had defeated him. Of course, this did not mean that there were 17 people who were stronger than him. For example, Li Han was his first opponent. At that time, Chunzong was definitely not as strong as he was now. At that time, his half-step sword intent was still 90%, not 100% like now. If he fought with Li Han again now, it was hard to say who would win. Chu Zhongyang deserved to be in first place. No wonder he was called the number one of the younger generation in the profound origin dynasty. As for the second place, it was Su Mubai. This was something that no one expected. It was completely out of everyone's expectations. The third place was Li Qianyu, the number one genius of the Li clan. The fourth place was Zhong Yunyan, the number one genius of the Zhong clan. The fifth place, the sixth place. The rankings were displayed one by one on a huge light screen, clearly visible. Chunzong found his name. The 18th place. Not being in the top 10, Chunzong was not surprised or dismayed. This was within his expectations. No matter what, this battle had brought him a lot of benefits. His comprehension of the half-step sword intent had almost reached the pinnacle. He only needed to cultivate for a while to reach the true peak. The 18th place. According to the rules, Chunzong would be given 180 hours of cultivation time in the profound origin holy tower. After that, everyone could stay in the profound origin garden in the royal capital. As for when they could go to the profound origin holy tower, it would depend on their own arrangements. However, there was a clear rule that the cultivation time had to be used up within a year. If it exceeded a year, no matter how much time was left, it would all be wasted. However, even if the first place had 108 hours, it would still be less than 10 days if converted to the number of days. It would not be difficult to finish using it within a year. Even the geniuses felt that the time was not enough. The Xintian court was still the same small palace as before. Chunzong sat inside and cultivated. The battles in the profound origin holy battle were very intense. Some of the opponents were very strong. However, even if the opponents were not as strong as him, They had their own strengths that were worth learning from. The Grand Elder of the Profound Nether Palace and the experts of the Profound Nether Palace were gathered in Su Mubai's palace. This was a supreme honor. This was the honor of the Profound Nether Palace in the Profound Nether Territory. All of you can go back. I'll stay here, Su Mubai said casually. All right. Cultivate well. The Grand Elder of the Profound Nether Palace was not displeased by Su Mubai's indifferent attitude. Instead, he reminded him patiently. Su Mubai did not say anything else. Instead, he waved his hand and signaled them to leave. He wanted to cultivate. Chapter 1453. The Xianyuan dynasty was in charge of the Xianyuan world, one of the 9 worlds of the Tianyuan sacred region. The Divine Mystery Palace was an important treasure of the Xianyuan dynasty's Xianyuan royal capital. It was not usually opened, only for major events, such as the Xianyuan Sacred Assembly and the Xianyuan Sacred Battle. The second most important treasure was the Xianyuan Sacred Tower. Of course, the second most important treasure was not the Xianyuan Sacred Tower, but the Xianyuan old ancestor had brought the Xianyuan Palace back a long time ago. The Xianyuan Sacred Tower was located in the center of the Xianyuan royal capital. It was a huge tower that stood above the ground, pointing to the sky. It was as if it was the center of the entire capital. How tall was the tower? It seemed to be 100 meters tall, but it also seemed to be more than that. It seemed to be endless, reaching straight into the sky. One look at it would make people feel awe. Even Saint Realm Masters could not avoid it. This pagoda was a precious treasure. It stood tall on the ground, seemingly without any protection, but in reality, there were often many experts scattered around. Moreover, the pagoda itself also contained astonishing power. If someone with bad intentions wanted to seize or destroy it, the consequences would be dire. Such a thing had happened before. A half-stepped great saint from the dark forces sneaked in and approached the Xianyuan Sacred Tower, trying to destroy it with his full strength. That half-stepped great sage expert was indeed very astonishing. He had managed to avoid the surveillance of the other experts. But in the end, not only did the half-stepped great saint fail to destroy the Xianyuan Sacred Tower, but he was also counterattacked by the power of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower. It was said that at that time, an expert walked out of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower. His body was covered in golden light, shining in all directions. It was even more dazzling than the sun. With just one move, he shattered the half-step great saint expert from the dark forces and completely obliterated him. Even his soul disappeared between heaven and earth. His soul was scattered and his Tao disappeared. Then, the figure that emitted a strong golden light returned to the Xianyuan Sacred Tower and never appeared again. No matter how the masters of the Xianyuan dynasty tried, it was useless. Until one day, the great saint of the Xianyuan dynasty ordered that no one should disturb the Xianyuan sacred spirit. But they also knew that the golden figure in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower was the Xianyuan sacred spirit. It seemed to be the spirit of the Xianyuan Holy Tower. It also let everyone know that the Xianyuan Holy Spirit had the strength of a great Saint Realm expert. In essence, it could be regarded as a great Saint Realm expert. Of course, this great Saint Realm expert was different. If no one was targeting the Xianyuan Holy Tower, it would not appear and would not care about anything. Mysteriousness made people even more curious. There was even a saying or a legend that whoever could obtain the approval of the Xianyuan Sacred Spirit in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower would have a Xianyuan Sacred Spirit appear, which represented a great opportunity. However, from ancient times until now, countless years had passed, yet no one had been able to do so. Gradually, this became a true legend, and no one believed it anymore. However, there were still some people who believed this. Some of the 108 geniuses had already entered the Xianyuan Sacred Tower to cultivate. Chunzong walked out from the Xintian Garden and looked up at the seemingly endless tower that reached into the clouds. He was secretly shocked. Limitless. Gao Yuan. A feeling of looking up at a towering mountain filled his heart. It had been half a month since the end of the Xianyuan Sacred Battle. During this half a month, Chunzong had been cultivating in the Xintian Garden. His cultivation had reached the limit and could not be improved, but his cultivation technique could be improved. After half a month of cultivation, with the excellent cultivation environment in the Shantian garden, his Taiyuan cloud scraping technique had broken through again and reached the 14th level. His strength had also improved. In addition, Chunzong had finally excavated 100% half-step sword intent to the extreme. It had reached a point where it could not be improved anymore. Naturally, the next step was to break through to the true heart sword Dao intent. However, this step was very difficult. It was even more difficult than breaking through from the half-saint realm to the saint realm. Countless people had been stopped by the half-step Dao intent to the Dao intent. Chunzong was not in a hurry. He was currently only a half-step saint. It was enough for him to master the half-step Dao intent to the extreme. As for transforming it into a true Dao intent, it would not be too late to wait until he broke through to the saint realm. Moreover, he still had a mysterious underworld fruit. It would be better for him to comprehend it when he consumed it. Now, Chunzong planned to comprehend more half-step Dao intents. At least, he had to master the second one. The more half-step Dao intents one mastered in the half-step saint realm, the greater their potential. For example, Chu Zhongyang had already mastered 2 types of half-step Dao intents. It was not clear whether he had mastered the third one. Perhaps he had, but he did not use it for various reasons. However, the Xinyuan Sacred Tower was a good opportunity. It was a rare opportunity. In half a month, Chunzong cultivated and comprehended with all his strength. Finally, he had truly transformed and absorbed the tempering of the Xinyuan Sacred Battle into his own use. Now, it was time to enter the Xinyuan Sacred Tower to cultivate. 90 hours. Chunzong did not know what it was like to cultivate in the Xinyuan Sacred Tower and what it felt like. Now he was here. The door of the Xinyuan Sacred Tower was closed. When Chunzong approached, the door was still closed. However, Chunzong's body passed through the door and disappeared into the Xinyuan Sacred Tower. The Xinyuan Sacred Tower was a treasure that contained rich Taoist rhymes. It was a treasure to comprehend Dao intents. It was different from the Divine Mystery Palace. Although Chunzong had not cultivated in the Xinyuan Sacred Tower before, he had some understanding of it. Challenge the tower. Whichever level he reached, he would cultivate on that level. The time spent in the tower was naturally counted as cultivation time. On the first floor of the Xinyuan Holy Tower, Chunzong felt an invisible force descending upon him, enveloping him in an instant. In an instant, his strength was sealed, and even the Azura avatar in his sea of consciousness was unable to sense anything. Chunzong sensed that the only power he could sense was half-step sword intent. Challenging the Xinyuan Sacred Tower depends on Dao intents. Half-step Dao intents are also included. Chunzong said to himself. The darkness around him gradually brightened. Traces of Taoist rhymes rippled and spread in all directions. Then, a figure appeared. It was a figure holding a sword. He wore a green robe, and a cool breeze accompanied him, blowing wisps after wisps. It was half-step wind Dao intent. As soon as the figure appeared, he attacked without hesitation. His sword slashed across the sky and attacked Chunzong with the speed and sharpness of the wind. There were no other power fluctuations. Only the aura of Dao intent spread. Since that was the case, Chunzong also attacked with his sword. He used half-step sword intent. In the blink of an eye, the sword slashed across the sky and defeated his opponent. His opponent's half-step Dao intent was only 70%. From another point of view, if the person who entered here did not comprehend 70% of half-step Dao intent, they would not have any hope of passing. Even if it was 70%, it was not 100% certain that they could pass. However, Chunzong's half-step sword intent was already at 100%. It had reached the limit of 100%. Such an opponent was not enough. In the blink of an eye, Chunzong entered the second floor of the Xinyuan Sacred Tower. There was another opponent on the second floor, but his half-step Dao intent had attained 80%. He similarly attacked with a single strike. Yet he was defeated and killed by Chunzong. On the third floor, his half-step Dao intent was at 90%. He was similarly defeated and killed by Chunzong with a single strike. On the fourth floor, his half-step Dao intent had attained 100%, and its might was obviously much stronger. Kill. On the fifth floor, his half-step Dao intent was still at 100%, but it was even deeper than the fourth floor. On the sixth floor, his half-step Dao intent was at 100%, and it had reached the limit. This time, Chunzong was unable to kill his opponent easily. He had to go through a fierce battle and seize an opportunity to successfully kill his opponent. On the seventh floor, it was still half-step Dao intent, yet it was suffused with an aura of invincibility. Chunzong was not a match for his opponent in the fierce battle and was killed. In the end, he stopped at the sixth floor. Could it be that my half-step sword intent has not reached the true limit? On the sixth floor, Chunzong couldn't help but ponder. It seemed that there was another level above this level, the level of perfection and flawlessness. From the first floor to the seventh floor, the time he spent was only around 30 minutes. This was nothing to Chunzong, who had 90 hours of cultivation time. On the sixth floor, Chunzong started to comprehend. The Dao aura that suffused the sixth floor was much denser than the first floor, and it could be easily sensed. Chunzong sat down cross-legged, eliminated all distracting thoughts, and carefully comprehended. This time, he comprehended the Sword Dao intent. The Sword Dao intent was a whole, and the Heart Sword Dao intent was a type of advancement. If he wanted to comprehend it, he naturally had to start from the foundation and gradually extend it. Time slowly passed by. Chunzong put aside the other Dao auras and only focused on the Sword Dao intense Dao aura, and he started to comprehend it from the foundation. With half-step sword intent that had reached the limit as the foundation, the efficiency of his comprehension was extremely shocking, and he quickly reached the limit. Under the combination, Chunzong looked for the point of breakthrough. In an instant, Chunzong felt that his half-step sword intent had a trace of perfection. This kind of perfection was the perfection after reaching the limit, and it seemed that no matter how one looked at it, it wouldn't be weakened in the slightest. In terms of power, perhaps it didn't increase, but there wasn't a trace of weakness left. From the deepest part of his heart and soul, a trace of satisfaction arose in Chunzong, and it seemed that there was nothing left out. At this point, the half-step Heart Sword Dao intent had reached the true limit, the limit of perfection. In fact, Chunzong didn't know that this step wasn't something that everyone could reach. The previous limit was already enough, and many people only reached that level. Whether one reached the limit of perfection was also very important, and it was related to the difficulty of improving in the future. Since the half-step sword intent had reached the limit of perfection, then the next step was to comprehend the second type of half-step Dao intent. But before that, he had to pass the seventh floor. Fight! A battle was launched again. This battle continued for an entire short period of time before Chunzong obtained a difficult victory and defeated his opponent. Subsequently, Chunzong attempted the eighth floor. His opponent at the eighth floor didn't utilize half-step Dao intents, but true Dao intents. Even if it was the lowest grade Dao intent, its might wasn't something that half-step Dao intents could compare to. A single strike. It was only a single strike, yet Chunzong was killed, and he could only cultivate at the seventh floor. But it was sufficient for him to cultivate at the seventh floor, as the density of the aura of the Dao here was much greater than the sixth floor. The Dao intent that's easiest for me to comprehend is probably the Fire Dao intent. Chunzong thought to himself. No matter if it was the Violet Cloud Black Star Flame, the Ancient Fire Refinement Technique, or the Dao Intent Refinement through the Three Tribulations, all of them provided great convenience to Chunzong when he comprehended the Fire Dao intent. Chapter 1454. Burning, Blazing. On the seventh floor of the Xinyuan Sacred Tower, Chunzong's body was filled with a shocking aura, as if it was burning everything. It was the Fire Taoist rhyme, the aura of the half-step Fire Taoist intent. 10%. Chunzong had comprehended 10% of the half-step Fire Taoist intent in a short period of time. This half-step Fire Taoist intent was the most basic level of the fire Taoist intent. With Chunzong's amazing comprehension ability and the unique environment of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower, his comprehension speed was amazing. 20% of the half-step fire Taoist intent. 30%. Soon, Chunzong had comprehended 40% of the half-step fire Taoist intent. Chunzong was able to comprehend so quickly because of his own conditions, such as the purple cloud black star flame and the ancient mystic fire refining technique. 40%. Chunzong soon comprehended 40% of the half-step fire Taoist intent. His speed slowed down slightly, but it was still amazing. Moreover, Chunzong directly appeared on the first floor of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower and fought with the Tower Guardian. Using 40% of the half-step fire Taoist intent to challenge 70% of the half-step fire Taoist intent, the result was naturally that Chunzong was beaten up. However, in the process, Chunzong's mastery of the half-step fire Taoist intent deepened. 50%, 60%, 70%. The increase of 10% after 10% was incomparably shocking. When Chunzong raised his half-step fire Taoist intent to 70%, he easily defeated his opponent on the first floor of the Xianyuan Sacred Tower and entered the second floor to continue fighting with the Tower Guardian. This kind of battle could be carried out many times as long as he wanted to. 80%. Defeated. 90%. Defeated. 100%. This time was even longer. However, it could not stop Chunzong's extraordinary ability and solid foundation. 100%. He kept going deeper until he reached the limit and reached perfection. After using the half-step sword intent, Chunzong's second half-step Dao intent reached perfection. During this period of time, Chunzong did not always stay in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower to comprehend the half-step Dao intent. Sometimes he would comprehend it, and sometimes he would return to the Xianyuan Garden to cultivate. Only in this way could he save time. After all, there was a limit to the amount of time one could spend in the Xianyuan Holy Tower. If there was no limit, Chunzong would be more than happy to stay in the Xianyuan Holy Tower at all times. When Chunzong had comprehended the half-step fire intent and comprehended it to the extreme, he had already used up 60 hours of the 92 hours, leaving him with only 60 hours left. However, although he had comprehended the half-step fire intent to the extreme, Chunzong's strength had not improved much in essence. It could only be said that he had more means to deal with the enemy. Furthermore, if he used the half-step fire intent, his strength would decrease. After all, the fire Dao inside of half-step fire intent was at the first level, and it was the most basic. On the other hand, the Dao inside of half-step sword intent was the heart sword Dao insight, and it was at least a second-level Dao insight, so its might was naturally different. However, if he could fuse the half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent, his power would increase greatly. For example, the finger strike Chu Zhongyang used to defeat him contained the combination of two types of half-step Dao insights, and its might was terrifying to the extreme and impossible to resist. Chunzong started to ponder. Should he use the remaining 60 hours to comprehend a new half-step Dao insight, or use it to fuse the half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent? Chunzong was completely confident that he would be able to comprehend another half-step Dao insight, and it would allow his potential to increase a step further, and it would naturally be beneficial to his future cultivation. On the other hand, fusing two types of half-step Dao insights would allow his current strength to increase greatly. Of course, it would similarly be beneficial to his future. In this way, I'll spend some time to comprehend another half-step Dao insight. Chunzong thought to himself, and bright lights shot out from his eyes as he'd already made up his mind. He would comprehend another type of half-step Dao insight, but he wouldn't comprehend it to a profound level, and he would leave some time to comprehend a method of fusing half-step Dao insights. On the 7th floor of the Xianyuan Sacred Pagoda, Chunzong comprehended it with all his might, but the comprehension of the third type of half-step Dao insight was even more difficult than the first two types. Chunzong didn't hesitate and directly chose the lightning Dao insight to comprehend half-step lightning intent. This ought to be the easiest half-step Dao insight to comprehend besides sword and fire. Lightning, lightning, Lightning. Countless inspirations gushed out one after another, and Chunzong seemed to be able to grasp them. Yet he seemed to be lacking something, and he was unable to grasp them no matter what. He didn't hurry, didn't become impatient, and comprehended slowly at a neither too slow nor too fast pace, and he would always be able to obtain something. When he was comprehending half-step fire intent, Chunzong had only spent 4 hours to comprehend 10% of it. Now, 6 hours had already passed, yet he still hadn't comprehended half-step lightning intent. 8 hours. 10 hours, 12 hours. Time flew by, and when it was the 14th hour, countless bright lights instantly gushed out into appearance and transformed into a bolt of lightning that seemed to be born from the void of darkness, and it instantly emitted a shocking might that tore through the sky. Lightning! Lightning! Chunzong's eyes flashed with bright lights, and the light of lightning illuminated the world. Half-step lightning intent. Initiate. As soon as he initiated, the accumulation of various comprehensions from before surged endlessly like a surging tide, and it caused Chunzong's comprehension of half-step lightning intent to rise steadily. 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. Only when it reached 40% did it stop and slow down. Chunzong made a prompt decision to temporarily give up on comprehending half-step lightning intent, and he switched to comprehending the fusion of half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent. Presently, Chunzong had grasped half-step sword intent that was 100% at the limit of perfection, half-step fire intent that was 100% at the limit of perfection, and half-step lightning intent that was 40% at the limit of perfection. 3 types of half-step Dao insights had established a solid foundation for Chunzong. Chunzong had a feeling that he could still comprehend a 4th type of half-step Dao insight, but the difficulty would be even greater than half-step lightning intent, and it would probably be difficult for him to comprehend a 4th type of half-step Dao insight, even if he used up the remaining time. In this way, he might as well spend his time on the method to fuse half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent, as he still had a chance of success. Chunzong didn't hesitate much and resolutely started to comprehend. A skyscraper was built from the ground, and everything had to rely on a foundation. If he wanted to fuse 2 different types of half-step Dao insights, he could only start from a weak point. If the power was too strong, it would instead intensify the conflict. He first tried to fuse 10% of half-step sword intent and 10% of half-step fire intent. If he succeeded, he could try to fuse 20% of half-step sword intent and 20% of half-step fire intent. As soon as he tried, Chunzong discovered the difficulty of it. Half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent were both Dao insights, but they were different. They were powers of different attributes, and it was extremely difficult to fuse them together. It was as if he wanted to forcefully squeeze 2 pieces of rock into one. It was simply difficult to do, and they would only collide with each other continuously. Chunzong kept trying, but it would only cause the collision of 2 different types of half-step Dao insights. Every collision would cause Chunzong's sea of consciousness to shake, and his spirit and willpower would be impacted, causing him to feel extremely uncomfortable. Chunzong couldn't help but ponder. In his mind, countless spiritual lights kept surging, like the blossoming of fireworks. Suddenly, a wisp of inspiration flashed through Chunzong's mind. It was very difficult to fuse solid objects. It was like steel or stone that kept colliding with each other. But what if it was liquid? What about gas? For example, 2 different colors of water could be fused together more easily and become a mixture of colors. Of course, there were also some liquids that were very strong. Even if they came into contact with each other, it was difficult for them to fuse together. Instead, they clearly coexisted, and that was not a fusion. The difficulty of fusing gas was much easier than fusing liquid. If he could turn half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent into gas, and then fuse them together, wouldn't the difficulty be even lower? Then, how could he turn half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent into gas? Chunzong immediately realized that the advantage of comprehending half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent to the extreme was that his control of half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent had reached a level where he could truly control them as he wished. Half-stepped out insight mist. Suddenly, a wisp of mist that was almost colorless but contained traces of light gold filled the air. Then, a wisp of light red mist filled the air. The two different colored mists approached and touched each other. Chunzong could feel the repulsion between the two mists. They were unwilling to fuse with each other, but the repulsion was much weaker than before. Spin. Under Chunzong's powerful will, the two different mists instantly started to spin, and they used this method to strengthen the fusion. As expected, under Chunzong's efforts, the repulsive force was eliminated bit by bit, and the two different mists gradually fused together. During the fusion process, countless lights appeared and sped up the fusion. Finally, the two mists completely fused and transformed into a wisp of light gold-red mist. It was slightly illusory, as if it wasn't material, yet it also seemed to exist in the void. It was like a reflection of the moon in the water, and it was indescribably profound. This aura fluctuation, Chunzong carefully observed the half-step Dao insight that had been fused. This was only the fusion of 10% half-step sword intent and 10% half-step fire intent, but he felt that its might was very strong. It had already surpassed 20% half-step sword intent and was close to 30% half-step sword intent, and it was even stronger than 30% half-step fire intent. In this way, if 20% was fused, its might would be even stronger, and if 30% was fused, it would be even stronger. If 70% was fused, then it would be close to 100% half-step sword intent and surpass 100% half-step fire intent. If 80% was fused, its might would surpass 100% half-step sword intent. If 90% was fused, it would be even stronger. If 100% was fused, this was Chunzong's assumption. But when Chunzong successfully fused 20% half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent, he realized that his assumption was wrong. The half-step sword fire Dao insight that was fused with 20% half-step sword intent and 20% half-step fire intent was actually close to 60% half-step sword intent and even surpassed 60% half-step fire intent. Could this increase be multiplied? If so, then wouldn't the fusion of 30% half-step fire intent and half-step sword intent be comparable to 90% half-step fire intent? In this way, as long as 40% was fused, it would surpass 100% half-step sword intent and be even stronger. If it was really so, Chunzong couldn't help but be extremely excited. Strong. However, the fusion of half-step Dao insights was very difficult and not so easy. After 20% was fused, 30% was several times stronger. After 30% was fused, it was just as Chunzong thought, and it directly reached the might of 90% half-step sword intent. In that case, his deduction was correct. However, when he wanted to fuse 40%, Chunzong realized that he had used up all his cultivation time. 90 hours had all been used up, and it was all used up. Chapter 1455. In the mysterious heavenly garden, Chunzong was meditating, constantly comprehending the fusion method of the half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent. Now he could fuse 30%, but the power of 30% fusion was not as good as 100% half-step sword intent, so it was useless to him. Only by fusing 40% half-step sword intent and 40% half-step fire intent could his strength break through the limit and advance further. It seemed that he still had a lot of room for improvement in the half-step Saint Realm, so he was not in a hurry to break through to the Saint Realm. This was to build the foundation. The more solid and vigorous the foundation was, the greater the benefits when breaking through. All the prodigies were like this. First, they had to accumulate, continuously accumulate until they reached the limit. After some meditation, it was extremely difficult to fuse 40% half-step sword intent and 40% half-step fire intent. It was impossible to do it in a short time. Should I stay or leave? Zong could not help but think. The world's essence chi in the mysterious heavenly garden was very rich. Although his cultivation had reached the limit, such world's essence chi was also helpful for the advancement of his cultivation method. However, the Taiyuan cloud shattering technique had reached the 14th level. It was extremely difficult to advance to the 15th level. Even with such an excellent environment, it was impossible to do it in a short time. Cultivation was difficult to advance. Cultivation method was more difficult to advance, and the comprehension and fusion of the half-step Tao intent was also more difficult. It was also more difficult to further improve his strength. Zong began to think. Experience. Putting oneself in danger was a way to sharpen oneself and stimulate one's potential, so that one's strength could be improved faster. Of course, experience was dangerous, but some dangers were inevitable if he wanted to improve himself faster. So, first, he had to find out which place in the mysterious heavenly dynasty was suitable for him to gain experience. If he wanted to gain experience, he could not just wander around aimlessly. There were very few people Zong was familiar with here. After all, the people of the mysterious Nether territory had left, leaving only him and Sumu Bai. Therefore, Zong found an expert guarding the mysterious heavenly garden to inquire about information. This expert was at the Mastery Saint realm. He was very strong, but he was not arrogant when facing Zong. Instead, his attitude was very good. It should be noted that Zong had achieved 18th place in the Xianyuan sacred battle. Furthermore, he was a loose cultivator, which was even more impressive. Such a person had extraordinary potential and a bright future ahead of him. There are indeed many suitable training grounds in the Xianyuan dynasty. The strong man immediately explained to Zong in great detail. In the end, he said, "I have a suggestion, but I don't know if you want to listen. Senior, please go ahead." Zong did not refuse. If the other party's suggestion was beneficial to him, he would naturally use it as a reference. My Xianyuan dynasty has one army and one guard. The expert smiled and said, one army is called the Xiantian army and the other guard is called the Zhenyuan guard. Black Heaven army, Zhenyuan guardians. Zong muttered. The Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guards each have their own duties. The duty of the mysterious heaven army is to fight against the void demons. As soon as he said that, Zong's pupils shrank to the size of needles. Void demon. The Xiantian army was to fight against the void demons. The Zhenyuan guard is to protect the Xianyuan dynasty, eliminate the dark forces, and maintain the stability of the dynasty. The Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard each have their own duties. One was external, while the other was internal. External was to fight against the invasion of the void demons. Internal was to fight against the dark forces and maintain the stability of the dynasty. The combination of the Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard ensured the immortality of the Xianyuan dynasty for thousands of years. However, both the Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard have to be at least First Heaven Saint rudiment stage, the strong man said again. Zong waited for the other party to continue. Since the Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard required one to be at least at the Saint rudiment stage to join, and he was far from it, the other party must have his reason for saying this. In order to better select talents, the Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard jointly built the Xianyuan palace. Only those below the Saint rudiment stage can enter. After listening to the other party's explanation, Zong's thoughts suddenly became clear. The Xianyuan palace. The Xiantian army and the Zhenyuan guard jointly built it to select talents to supplement the army. After all, whether it was fighting against the void demons or the dark forces, there would be sacrifices. Once a sacrifice was made, new blood would be needed. Otherwise, the army would gradually weaken and eventually disappear. If an ordinary cultivator wants to enter the Xianyuan palace, they have to go through various tests, but you don't have to. All the prodigies in the Xianyuan Saint battle can join the Xianyuan palace directly without going through the tests. Of course, this isn't forced. It's your choice. However, in my opinion, the Xianyuan palace is the best place for a loose cultivator like you, the strong man said. Zong did not answer immediately. Instead, he thought about it. The strong man was not in a hurry. He was just giving a suggestion. As for the choice, it was up to Chunzong. With Chunzong's talent, he was now staying in the Xiantian garden. There were relevant rules in place, and no forces could touch this place. However, if he left the Xiantian garden, he would soon be recruited by many forces. After all, a peerless prodigy who could obtain 18th place in the Xianyuan Saint Battle would have extraordinary achievements in the future. At the very least, he would be a super powerhouse at the peak of the Saint Rudiment stage. His strength would be much stronger than ordinary powerhouses at the peak of the Saint Rudiment stage. It was even possible for him to become a half-step Great Saint. As for becoming an ultimate powerhouse at the Great Saint stage, he did not dare to think about it. Even Chu Zhongyang, who was known as the strongest person among the younger generation in the Xianyuan dynasty, could not become an ultimate powerhouse at the Great Saint stage. Chunzong thought about it carefully. This was related to his future. There were nothing more than two paths in front of him. One was to continue being a loose cultivator. He would have more freedom, but it would also be bumpy. He would have to rely on himself to fight for everything. He might not even be able to achieve good results. Previously, Chunzong had planned to experience the cultivation of a loose cultivator. However, it would not be forever. Everything would depend on the opportunity. The second was to join a force and rely on his own ability to be valued by that force. He would rely on his own efforts to obtain resources. Compared to being a loose cultivator, it was undoubtedly more beneficial to his cultivation. However, to a certain extent, he would have some freedom. There were gains and losses. Chunzong knew very well that he would not resist. The most important thing was to choose a path that was beneficial to him. Only then would he be able to move forward. Deep in his heart, Chunzong preferred the second path. After all, it was the path that he was more familiar with. It would be more beneficial to his cultivation. In this way, joining the Xianyuan Palace was the best way. After all, if he wanted to join a force, the Xianyuan Palace was undoubtedly the most suitable because it belonged to the Xianyuan dynasty. Other forces, including the Li clan and the Zhong clan, were inferior to it. With Chunzong's talent, and so on, joining the Xianyuan Palace would not require him to go through any assessment. He would directly become a member of the Xianyuan Palace. The Xianyuan Palace was actually not far from the Xianyuan Park. After joining the Xianyuan Palace, Chunzong received a token that was closely related to him. It was the symbol of the Xianyuan Palace's disciple identity. In addition, Chunzong received an additional initial reward from the Xianyuan Palace because he was a peerless prodigy in Xianyuan sacred battle. In fact, every person who successfully joined the Xianyuan Palace would receive an initial reward, which was a sum of Xianyuan merit points and a Xianyuan rank. It was just that the rewards varied according to the individual. The Xianyuan rank was the Xianyuan Palace's disciple ranking. It was divided into 4 ranks from the lowest to the highest, which were Yellow, Xianyuan, Earth, and Heaven. The Xianyuan rank represented one's status and authority in the Xianyuan Palace. The Xianyuan Palace was backed by the entire Xianyuan dynasty and the Xianyuan royal family. The Xianyuan Palace was rich in resources. The higher one's authority, the more valuable items one could exchange for. However, it was not that easy to increase one's Xianyuan rank. Most of the disciples who joined the Xianyuan Palace received the same initial reward, which was a yellow rank disciple ranking and 100 Xianyuan merit points. However, Chunzong was different. Chunzong's initial reward was a black rank disciple ranking and 1,000 Xianyuan merit points. Within the Xianyuan Palace, Chunzong was arranged to stay in one of the palaces. This was a palace that corresponded to the Xianyuan rank, and the cultivation environment was better than the yellow rank palaces. As for what he could exchange for, he only needed to do it in the palace. Chunzong looked around to see what treasures he could exchange for in the Xianyuan Palace. His disciple ranking was black rank, which corresponded to the black rank authority. Therefore, he could see all the yellow rank, black rank, and half of the earth rank treasures. As for the heaven rank treasures, he could not see them at all with his current disciple ranking. If he wanted to see the treasures he could exchange for with the heaven rank authority, he had to at least raise his disciples' rank to the earth rank. After a cursory look, Chunzong found that the treasures of the yellow rank were basically useless to him. The treasures of the black rank were much better than those of the yellow rank, but they were not very useful to him now. However, the treasures that could be exchanged for with half of the earth rank authority tempted Chunzong. Unfortunately, he did not have enough Xianyuan merit points to exchange for them. It was worth mentioning that the treasures of the yellow rank required between 100 and 1,000 Xianyuan merit points to exchange for. The treasures of the black rank required between 1,000 and 10,000 Xianyuan merit points to exchange for. As for the treasures of the earth rank, they required more than 10,000 Xianyuan merit points to exchange for. Chunzong could not help but shake his head when he saw that he only had 1,000 Xianyuan merit points to exchange for the lowest black rank treasures. Just now, Chunzong had only taken a cursory look. Now, Chunzong was looking at it carefully. With this look, Chunzong immediately discovered something. Cultivation technique. Starting from a yellow level, there was actually a cultivation technique. Furthermore, it was a top-grade saint level cultivation technique. The Xianyuan technique. Chunzong was curious, so he looked at it carefully. There was a detailed introduction to the Xian origin formula. It was said that it was a complete saint-grade cultivation method created by the ancestor of the Xian Yuan dynasty. However, it was only a cultivation method and did not have any matching martial arts or secret techniques. Unknowingly, the value of this saint rank cultivation technique decreased by a lot. After all, the saint rank cultivation techniques that were passed down in many factions would at least have a matching martial art or secret technique that could unleash greater power. In addition, the power cultivated by the Xian formula was neutral and mild. There was nothing particularly outstanding about it, nor was there any shortcomings. Chapter 1456. The Great Mystic Art was a top-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique and had a total of 30 levels. Yellow level privilege could be exchanged for the first 10 levels, black level privilege for the first 20 levels, and earth level privilege for the complete 30 levels. The first 10 levels of the Grand Mystic Technique required 100 Xianyuan merit points. The first 20 levels required 1,000 Xianyuan merit points. And as for the complete Grand Mystic Technique, it required 10,000 Xianyuan merit points. In comparison, Chunzong knew that the Great Profound Origin Art was a blessing, a benefit for joining the Mystic Origin Palace as a disciple. However, many Mystic Origin Palace disciples wouldn't choose to exchange for the Great Mystic Art because they were of high birth and could cultivate the top-grade Saint-tier cultivation techniques passed down in their respective factions. Even if they weren't complete, they could still cultivate because they could obtain the complete version in the future. Moreover, there were martial arts and secret techniques that went along with it, so it was undoubtedly more suitable. The Great Mystic Art was like a commoner's genius. It was also very suitable for those geniuses who possessed outstanding talent but were of lower birth. They just happened to lack a top-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique. Even though the Great Mystic Art was a mediocre top-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique in all aspects, it wasn't something a high-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique could compare to. It was only mediocre when compared to top-grade Saint-tier cultivation techniques. Chunzong cultivated the Taiyuan Cloud scraping art. Although there was a martial art that went along with it, it couldn't compare to the Great Mystic Art. However, there was nothing wrong with choosing the Great Mystic Art since he couldn't obtain a better top-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique. At the very least, it could further increase his strength. Chunzong also came to a conclusion based on the characteristics of the Great Mystic Art. The Great Mystic Art was somewhat similar to the Taiyuan Cloud scraping art, so it would be easier to cultivate it. 1,000 Xianyuan merit points might seem like a lot, but there was a limit to what he could exchange for. He might as well exchange for the Great Xianyuan Art to change his cultivation and raise his strength. After that, he could earn more Xianyuan merit points to exchange for more useful items. The inheritance jades for the first 20 levels of the Great Mystic Art were quickly delivered to Chunzong. Chunzong directly received the information within. A portion of it was the analysis of some experts on the first 20 levels of the Great Mystic Art. It could be considered a hidden benefit. Chunzong received the powerful soul in an extremely short time. Then, Chunzong began to comprehend it. The Great Mystic Art was worthy of being a top-grade, saint-tier cultivation technique. Even if it was mediocre, it was still profound, surpassing the Taiyuan cloud scraping art. However, as Chunzong continued to accumulate experience and improve his cultivation base, he was able to further develop the potential of his soul. Thus, it was not too difficult for him to comprehend it. Not to mention, the Mystic Palace was more or less helpful in cultivation. Chunzong wholeheartedly comprehended it. Moreover, some of the profundities of the Great Mystery Formula were similar to the Great Abyss Cloud scraping technique, which further reduced the difficulty of comprehending it. Coupled with the experience and analysis of a group of experts, the difficulty of comprehending it was further reduced. Level. Chunzong wasn't in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he continued to comprehend. His Taiyuan cloud scraping art had reached the 14th level. If he wanted to cultivate the Great Mystic Art to a level that could rival or even surpass the Taiyuan cloud scraping art, he would need at least the 13th level. Therefore, Chunzong's goal was to comprehend the 13th level. If possible, he wanted to comprehend the 14th or even the 15th level. Then, with the help of the superior cultivation environment, he would cultivate to the pinnacle of comprehension. That way, his strength would increase by another step. Otherwise, if he didn't comprehend to a certain level and rashly changed his cultivation, it would only drag him down. It had to be said that the Great Mystic Art was indeed a top cultivation technique suitable for commoners. Not only did it cost a lot of contribution points, but it also came with the expert's own comprehension, allowing them to better comprehend the mysteries within. With Chunzong's powerful perception, it was very suitable for him to comprehend it. A month later, Chunzong achieved his goal of comprehending the 13th level. Chunzong didn't stop cultivating and continued to comprehend, even though his momentum was not over yet. The 14th level was slightly more difficult. It took him a full 5 days to comprehend it. It took him 10 days to comprehend the 15th level. It took Chunzong 1.5 months to comprehend the 15th level of the Great Mystic Art. It's time to change my cultivation, Chunzong said to himself as he took a deep breath. His eyes shone with an extremely sharp light. The Yuan Qi of heaven and earth in the Mystic Origin Palace's Mystic Origin Palace was about the same as the Mystic Heaven Gardens, but it was much purer. It was at least 30% purer. This would be extremely convenient for him to change his cultivation technique. Because of this, Chunzong was confident that he would be able to change his cultivation technique in a short period of time and recover his strength. The first level of the Great Mystic Art began to circulate. Boundless and pure Yuan Qi of heaven and earth suddenly surged from all directions and entered Chunzong's body. It was immediately absorbed and circulated according to the first level of the Great Mystic Art, producing Great Mystic Half-Saint Force. The first level was completed. He cultivated the second level in a spurt of energy. Then he cultivated the third level. A day later, Chunzong began cultivating the fourth level. The further he progressed, the slower his cultivation speed became. After 5 days, Chunzong cultivated to the 7th level. After 15 days, Chunzong cultivated to the 10th level. It's time. Chunzong made a prompt decision. He immediately dispersed the power of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art that had been compressed in a corner and transformed it into the purest energy. It filled every part of his body in an instant, as if it wanted to burst his body. The power of the 14th level, a high-grade saint stage cultivation technique, was at the peak of the half-saint stage. Once it was dispersed, it wreaked havoc like a flood bursting through a dam. It was like a tsunami that destroyed everything around it. It was extremely terrifying. If it weren't for Chunzong's tyrannical physique, he would have been injured or even shattered from the inside in an instant. Even so, Chunzong felt waves of pain coming from his body. It was as if his body was about to explode and his whole body was swelling up. He circulated the 10th level of the Great Mystery Art with all his strength and began to absorb and refine the pure power of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art. The reason why he chose to refine the power of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art at the 10th level was because only a sufficient level of the Great Mystery Art could refine it. Otherwise, if the level wasn't high enough, there would be nothing he could do. Refine, refine, refine. The boundless power of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art was constantly being refined, increasing the power of the Great Mystery Art and increasing the speed of refinement. The 11th level was completed. The 11th level was completed, and the speed of absorption and refinement increased by a lot. The 12th level. With sufficient power, the speed of cultivation of the Great Mystery Art was astonishing. The 13th level. The 13th level of the Great Mystery Art immediately absorbed and refined all the power of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art. Chunzong gathered all the power in his body in a spurt of energy and exploded in an instant, breaking through the limit. Break! The 14th level of the Great Mystery Art. After reaching the 14th level, Chunzong didn't stop. He continued to absorb and refine the Yuan Qi of heaven and earth into his body to consolidate his cultivation technique. The Great Mystery Art was a top-grade Saint-tier cultivation technique. The power cultivated at the 13th level was already superior to that of the 14th level of the Taiyuan cloud scraping art. Now that he had reached the 14th level, it was even more powerful and had indirectly increased Chunzong's strength. After consolidating his cultivation, Chunzong opened his eyes. They shone with a sharp light, like cold lightning piercing through the air. This time, he had spent more than 2 months in seclusion, and his strength had also improved. Now that I don't have a single Xinyuan merit point left, I need to earn more merit points, Chunzong said to himself. Only by earning Xinyuan merit points could he exchange them for things beneficial to his cultivation. There was a very common way to earn merit points, and that was to carry out missions. Of course, turning in some treasures, cultivation techniques, and secret techniques could also earn a corresponding amount of merit points. For example, if Chunzong had turned in the Burning Fiend Azure technique and the Thousand Form Azure technique, he would have definitely earned a lot of merit points. However, Chunzong wasn't willing to do so because those techniques belonged to his Azura doppelganger, Chinxiu. As such, he could only carry out missions. He didn't need to leave the palace to choose a mission. He could do so in his own palace. Opening the panel, Chunzong looked carefully. There were many missions in the mission column, and they were divided into 4 levels corresponding to the authority of a disciple. Yellow, black, earth, sky. Yellow rank disciples could only accept yellow rank missions and some black rank missions. Black rank disciples could not only accept all yellow rank and black rank missions, they could also accept some earth rank missions. The higher the level of the mission, the greater the merit points and other rewards. Chunzong looked carefully. He had only skimmed through the yellow missions, and the rewards were not high, at most 100 merit points. Chunzong's focus was on the black missions. The reward for a black mission was at least 100 merit points, and the upper limit was 1,000. Of course, the reward for such a mission wasn't that high since it required at least 1,000 merit points to exchange for black treasures. One had to go through many missions to accumulate a considerable amount of merit points. This was also why the Xianyuan Palace didn't want to let their disciples have it too easy. Missions were also a kind of training. Chunzong carefully looked at the black rank mission, and then looked at the earth rank mission. The earth mission's rewards were naturally higher, at least 1,000 merit points. Chunzong also saw that apart from the yellow, black, earth, and sky missions, there were also 3 levels: low level, mid level, and high level. After careful comparison, comparing the possible difficulty of the mission, comparing the execution time and route of the mission, and so on, Chunzong finally made his choice. Of these 3 mystic rank missions, 2 were mid-tier mystic rank missions, and 1 was high-tier mystic rank missions. If all 3 missions were completed, he would receive a total of 2,300 merit points and 500 Earth Restoration Pills. If he couldn't complete them, there would be no punishment. Most of the missions in the Xinyuan Palace were not unique and could be chosen by many people. Of course, it wasn't unlimited. Each mission had a label and could be accepted by several people. For example, of the 3 missions that Chunzong had accepted, he could accept them at least twice, and at most 3 times. However, when Chunzong accepted them, one of the missions had already been used up, and the other 2 missions each had 1 use left. Some of these missions could only be completed once, while others could be completed multiple times. Chapter 1457. In the profound Origin Dynasty, there were 1 capital, 3 paths, 9 provinces, and 27 prefectures. Of the 3 missions that Chunzong accepted, he chose the most optimal route and completed them one by one. The first mission was to harvest the cold nether essence, which was used for refining pills. The cold nether essence was located in the cold nether mountain, and it usually grew in caves. Hanming Mountain was a mountain in the Ming Yuan path. Chunzong used the Empty Space Temple's Empty Space Gate to reach the Ming Yuan city of the Ming Yuan path. After leaving Bright Origin City, Chunzong headed straight for the cold nether mountain. The cold nether mountain was a huge mountain range that stretched for more than 1,000,000 li. The moment one stepped into the range of the cold nether mountain, they could feel the temperature drop. The deeper one went, the colder it became. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to survive in this environment, and they would freeze to death in a few breaths. However, this kind of coldness was nothing to Chunzong. As he went deeper into the mountain, Chunzong tried to comprehend the fusion of his half-step sword intent and half-step fire intent. Once he succeeded, his strength would break through the limit once more, and he would become even stronger. If I don't borrow the strength of Azura's avatar, I might be able to kill an early First Heaven Saint realm expert, Chunzong thought to himself. As for whether it was true or not, he wasn't sure. After all, his strength had increased a lot, but it wasn't by much. Following the instructions on the mission, Chunzong began his search. There were many caves in the cold nether mountain, and they were called cold nether caves. Almost every cold nether cave produced cold nether essence. However, after so many years, many of the cold nether caves' cold nether essence have been taken away. Although it could be reproduced, it took time. Usually, it would take 100 years to produce a single drop of cold nether essence. As time passed, the amount of cold nether essence decreased, and it became more valuable. In the beginning, cold nether essence could be found anywhere, and its value wasn't high at all. Now, the difficulty of finding cold nether essence had increased by thousands of times, and its value had increased by tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times. Even so, there were still many cultivators who would enter the cold nether mountain to search for the cold nether quintessential essence. If they sold it, they would be able to obtain a considerable amount of wealth for their own cultivation. Chunzong walked out of cave. This was an abandoned cave, but Chunzong went in to try his luck. He wanted to see if the cold nether quintessential essence would regenerate, but unfortunately, it wasn't. Chunzong was not discouraged. This was only the first cave. There are many more in cold nether mountain. He continued to search. 1, 2, 3. Chunzong searched one mountain after another, but he couldn't find the cold nether quintessential essence. However, this mission was a Mystic-class mid-tier mission. The reward was 600 Mystic Origin Merit points and 100 Earth Origin elixirs. It was not cheap, and it was normal that it was hard to find it. Chunzong searched patiently. He searched through more than a dozen caves, but he still couldn't find the cold nether quintessential essence. When Chunzong walked out of another cave, he encountered 3 cultivators. There were 2 men and 1 woman. One was a middle-aged man, one was a young man, and the woman also looked young. When they saw Chunzong, the young man's eyes were filled with vigilance. The young woman stared at Chunzong as if she wanted to see through him. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed, but he immediately restrained himself and revealed a smile. "Friend, it seems that you're also here to search for the cold nether quintessential essence." The middle-aged man greeted with a smile. Chunzong nodded. "Friend, I can see that this should be your first time searching for the cold nether quintessential essence, the middle-aged man said again, which surprised Chunzong. How could he tell? As if he could see the surprise in Chunzong's heart, the middle-aged man smiled and said, "My name is Yuan Huan. I'm a quintessential essence seeker. I have rich experience in searching for the cold nether quintessential essence. I can determine whether a cave like this has cold nether quintessential essence with a glance." Yuan Huan pointed at the cave not far away. He wasn't lying. He did appear in the cold nether mountain all year round, searching everywhere for the cold nether quintessential essence to sell. Therefore, he had accumulated rich experience over the years. Although he didn't dare say that he was 100% accurate, he was 70% to 80% accurate. If you're willing to pay a price, I can take you with me to search for the cold nether quintessential essence. Yuan Huan stated his purpose. Chunzong took a deep look at Yuan Huan. Soon after, he smiled and asked, "What price?" With his extremely sharp senses, Chunzong could sense that this person wasn't as kind as he appeared. At least, his purpose wasn't so pure. However, this person did have experience in searching for the cold nether quintessential essence, which would be helpful to him. As for whether this person had any ill intentions, Chunzong wasn't afraid. After all, these three people were only half-step saints. Chunzong wasn't afraid of half-step saints. If worse came to worst, he still had his Azura clone. His Azura clone was now much stronger than before. Strength was the source of confidence, the source of confidence. With strength, one should be fearless. Of course, fearlessness wasn't just related to strength. It was also related to one's temperament. Some people didn't have enough temperament, so no matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be confident enough. Chunzong wasn't like that. Not much, just 10 Earth Origin pills. Yuan Huan smiled. "If you find the cold nether quintessential essence under my guidance, you'll have to pay me another 100 Earth Origin pills." Yuan Huan's asking price wasn't little. Of course, compared to the value of the cold nether quintessential essence, it wasn't much. Okay. Chunzong directly took out 10 Earth Origin pills and gave them to the other party. This was a deal. Yuan Huan took the 10 Earth Origin pills, and a trace of light flashed in his eyes. It was almost undetectable. "Follow me," Yuan Huan said. As for the young man and woman, he didn't introduce them. The two of them didn't speak either, as if they were mutes. Since the other party didn't speak, Chunzong naturally wouldn't care. One had to admit that this Yuan Huan was very experienced. After a few rounds of observation, he was able to determine whether or not there was cold nether quintessential essence in an abandoned cave. This saved Chunzong a lot of time. Shortly after, Yuan Huan stopped in front of the cave and carefully observed it. Then, his face became slightly serious, and a trace of joy flashed in his eyes. "There's most likely cold nether quintessential essence in here," Yuan Huan said in a low voice. He was secretly excited. For essence seekers like them, it wasn't easy to find cold nether quintessential essence. Of course, they would be excited to find one. As for why they didn't sell it themselves, there were other reasons. For example, they didn't have enough strength to protect the cold nether quintessential essence. Hearing that there was cold nether quintessential essence, Chunzong's eyes lit up, but he didn't rush in. "Let's go," Yuan Huan immediately said. She took the lead and stepped into the cave. Chunzong followed behind her. Then, the young man also took a step into the cave. At the instant he entered, he turned his head around and cast a glance at the young woman, signaling her with his eyes. The young woman nodded her head in an undetectable manner. Soon after, she walked into the cave. However, she did not immediately enter the cave. Instead, she quickly set up a barrier and sealed the entrance of the cave, forming a layer of light barrier that rippled like water. With this barrier, no matter if it was going in or out, it would be blocked. After setting up the barrier, the young woman walked into the cave. As Yuan Huan, the marrow seeker, ventured deeper into the cave, Chunzong could feel that they were descending. The temperature in the air was getting lower and lower. Ice shards could be seen on the walls and ceiling of the cave, emitting a frightening chill. Even a Foundation Realm cultivator would find it difficult to move in a place like this. However, Chunzong didn't feel any discomfort. Even if the temperature dropped twice, it wouldn't affect Chunzong at all. "We're almost there," Yuan Huan whispered. She couldn't suppress the excitement in her voice. After about 1,000 meters, Yuan Huan stopped. Chunzong also stopped and stared ahead. There was a small hole in front of them, and there was a pool of black liquid inside. It was very thick and gave off a shocking chill. Cold, nether quintessential essence. Chunzong's eyes lit up. He stepped forward and appeared in front of the cold, nether quintessential essence like the wind. He took out a jade bottle and sucked the cold, nether quintessential essence into it. As long as he brought the cold, nether quintessential essence back to the mysterious origin palace, he would receive 600 mysterious origin merit points and 100 earth origin pills. Chunzong did not care about the 100 earth yuan elixirs. It did not matter if he had them or not. However, the 600 Xinyuan merit points were what Chunzong really needed. Immediately, Chunzong took out 100 earth origin pills and gave it to Yuan Huan. This was the price they had agreed on. After he found the cold, nether quintessential essence and obtained it, he would have to pay another 100 earth origin pills. Yuan Huan took the 100 earth origin pills and put them away. A strange smile appeared on her face, and she quickly retreated. At the same time, she waved her hand. Suddenly, light surged and intertwined, spreading in all directions and sealing the area. It was extremely fast. Even though Chunzong was vigilant, he was still a bit slower. He was trapped in the light like a cage. What is the meaning of this? Chunzong didn't panic at all and asked casually. This is a formation disk. The formation disk activates is called the Dragon Imprisoning Formation. As the name suggests, even a true dragon will be imprisoned. Yuan Huan's previous amiable appearance was replaced by a cold and stern smile, and his eyes became sharp. At the same time, the male and female youths appeared beside Yuan Huan and coldly stared at Chunzong in the dragon prison formation. They constantly sized him up, and a cold smile appeared on their faces. "Hand it over." Yuan Huan's voice was low and ethereal, with a hint of greed. "Hand over the cold, nether quintessential essence and all your wealth, and I will spare your life." Otherwise, needless to say, Chunzong knew what it meant. It was none other than to take his life. "The cold, nether quintessential essence is with me. You have seen it. Moreover, there are many earth origin pills in my storage ring." A smile appeared on Chunzong's face as he said slowly. Through the light of the dragon prison formation, he stared at Yuan Huan and said, "If you want it, come and get it yourself." However, Yuan Huan was very vigilant. He could vaguely see that Chunzong was a sage-to-be and not a saint, which was why he dared to make such a move. However, he didn't know his opponent's strength, so he couldn't be too cautious. Chapter 1458. Chunzong waved his finger. It streaked across the sky like a sword. Layers of ripples suddenly appeared on the light of the imprisoning dragon matrix. The ripples spread out. The power of this finger was astonishing. It was enough to kill an ordinary high-level half-saint. However, it couldn't do anything to the power of the imprisoning dragon matrix. It's useless. With your half-saint strength, even if you are a peerless genius, you can't break the imprisoning dragon array, the young man said again. His voice was sharper, and there seemed to be some resentment in it. "Little brat, hand over your storage ring obediently, and you can still live," Yuan Huan said with a gloomy expression. There was already a hint of impatience in his voice. Chunzong ignored him. He unsheathed the gilded mountain sword and slashed at him. To be honest, the range of the imprisoning dragon array was very small, while the gilded mountain sword was very large. It was difficult to use it, but Chunzong didn't have such a problem. With his superb swordsmanship, he could control the sword in his hand with great precision. With a twist of his wrist, the gilded mountain sword spun in a small range and suddenly burst out with amazing power. The sword that seemed to be able to split open a mountain made the expressions of the three people outside the imprisoning dragon array change. Although they kept saying that the imprisoning dragon array could trap a Saint Realm expert, they had never really tested it. After all, with their strength, it would be suicide to fight a Saint Realm expert. However, they had trapped a lot of half-saints, and none of them had been able to break it. Boom! The sword slashed down, and a terrible power burst out. The imprisoning dragon array shook and flashed, but it still didn't break. Yuan Huan and the other two people subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. They realized that the person trapped by the imprisoning dragon array was definitely a peerless genius. Otherwise, the power of his sword couldn't be so terrifying. That sword was enough to kill all three of them. Fortunately, the imprisoning dragon array was strong enough and didn't let them down. Uncle Yuan, it's better to do it as soon as possible. The young man was very afraid of Chunzong. There was jealousy and resentment in his eyes, which made Chunzong a little confused. Chunzong knew that this imprisoning dragon array was very tough. If he was given enough time, he would be able to find a weak point and break it. However, the three of them would not give him enough time, and from the looks of it, he was already anxious. Since that was the case, he might as well unleash all his power. Heart Domain, Celestial Crystal Tyrant Body, 100% half-step sword intent. The 14th level of the De Xian formula. An ultimate sword move. Extreme Heart Sword Style. Extreme Heart, Extreme Sword. This was an extremely powerful sword. If he could return to the Xinyuan Holy Battle with such strength, Chunzong was confident that he would be able to increase his ranking by at least a few places. He might even be able to challenge the top 10. With this kind of strength, killing an early First Heaven Saint Realm expert wouldn't be a problem. The power of this sword had already surpassed the half-true Saint Realm. The golden sword beam pierced through the air and struck the imprisoning dragon matrix. Wherever the tip of the sword landed, a speck of light surged and rippled like a raging wave. A pop sound rang out. It sounded very beautiful, but it caused Yuan Huan and the other two's expressions to change greatly. They were extremely terrified. The three of them were originally about to attack and kill Chunzong within the imprisoning dragon formation, but they suddenly retracted their strength, turned around without hesitation, and fled at their fastest speed. The light of the imprisoning dragon array shattered like porcelain. It couldn't block Chunzong's sword at all. Of course, Chunzong had to admit that the dragon imprisoning formation was indeed very strong. It could withstand the power of many high-level half-saints. Chunzong estimated that if half of the peerless geniuses in the Xianyuan Sacred War were trapped, they would not be able to break free from the dragon imprisoning formation without using some trump cards. After breaking the imprisoning dragon array, Chunzong's gaze fell on the three figures who were flying away. He took a step forward. Flowing light, flying shadow. In the blink of an eye, Chunzong's speed reached its peak. After integrating the half-step thunder into the flowing light, flying shadow, Chunzong was like a flash of lightning. His speed was much faster. In the blink of an eye, Chunzong caught up with the three people and swung his sword without hesitation. Stop! No! The three people were horrified and shocked, but they couldn't stop Chunzong at all. If they took the 100 Earth Restoration elixirs, it would be fine. Unfortunately, they were too greedy and didn't have the corresponding ability. In other words, they found the wrong people to be greedy. With a slash of the sword, the three people were cut in half in an instant and died an unnatural death. Chunzong flicked his huge sword and immediately picked up the three people's storage rings and checked them. There weren't many things in the young man and young woman's storage rings, and they weren't valuable. However, Chunzong found hundreds of Earth Restoration elixirs in Yuan Huan's storage ring, which was a good value. In addition, he even found a trace of cold nether essence. Chunzong couldn't help but smile. After turning in the 2 traces of cold nether essence, it was equivalent to him completing 2 missions. He could obtain 1,200 Xinyuan merit points and 200 Earth Restoration elixirs. Chunzong didn't know if Yuan Huan had evil intentions from the beginning or if it was gradually growing. He also didn't know why the young man was hostile to him, but it didn't matter. These three greedy people had already suffered. Now that this mission was completed, it was time for him to leave cold Nether Mountain and carry out the next mission. The target of the next mission was a mountain stronghold that was causing trouble. There were powerful bandits in the stronghold. He could obtain 700 Xinyuan merit points and 100 Earth Restoration elixirs if he killed them. As for what he could obtain in the stronghold, it was up to him. However, when Chunzong arrived at the stronghold, he found that it was empty. There were only broken weapons, countless dry bloodstains, and crisscrossing traces of chaos. Obviously, there had been a fierce battle here, and the result of the battle was the destruction of the stronghold. Either it was destroyed by someone, or it could be a disciple from some faction or a disciple of Xinyuan Palace. However, since it had been destroyed, Chunzong couldn't complete this mission. He could only leave and head to the next mission location. This was a high-grade Xinyuan rank mission, and the reward was 1,000 Xinyuan merit points and 300 Earth Restoration elixirs. It was quite generous. He just hoped that no one else had completed it. This mission was to kill a person, an extremely vicious cultivator. So far, several geniuses had already died in his hands, which was why there was such a shocking reward. 100 Transformation Blood Butcher. 100 Transformation meant that this person was good at changing his appearance, figure, and even aura, making it difficult for others to find his whereabouts. Blood Butcher meant that this person was ruthless and merciless. When a ruthless and merciless person mastered the ability to change his appearance and figure, it would be even more difficult to find and deal with him. Mingyuan Road, in a small town in Taixing Province. According to the information, this was the place where 100 Transformation Blood Butcher last appeared. As for whether he was still here, Chunzong didn't know. However, in order to complete the mission, he could only rush over to have a look and search. Maybe he would be lucky enough to meet him. In this small town, Chunzong had already stayed for 3 days, but he still couldn't find any trace of 100 Transformation Blood Butcher. Today, Chunzong went to a restaurant to enjoy delicious food. There were people talking in the restaurant. However, the content of the conversation was useless to him. At this time, a figure walked into the restaurant. It was very ordinary, and there was nothing unusual about it. However, for some reason, Chunzong raised his head to take a look. It was a young man in a white silk robe. There was an oily white jade hanging on his waist. As he walked, he had a graceful demeanor, like a fine young master in a chaotic world. His aura was very ordinary. He had cultivated, but was not strong. Such a person would naturally attract people's attention. Many people greeted him, so he must be a regular in this restaurant or a famous person in this small town. Young Masterman, I had a great time talking with you a few days ago. Please take a seat here. Let's toast again. A middle-aged man in luxurious clothes stood up and greeted him with a smile. Okay. The elegant young master immediately closed the folding fan in his hand and walked over with a spring breeze smile. It was a very ordinary scene, a very harmonious scene. When Chunzong was about to withdraw his gaze, he suddenly stopped and stared at the young master. Brother, is there anything I can help you with? Young Masterman noticed Chunzong's gaze. He stopped and turned his head to look at him. With a modest smile on his face, he asked politely, Nothing. Chunzong smiled slightly. He shook his head and withdrew his gaze, ignoring the young master. If you don't mind, please come over and have a few drinks with me. Young Master Min spoke again. Thank you, but I have to go. Chunzong refused. He called the waiter of the restaurant, paid for the dishes, and got up to leave the restaurant. Young Masterman glanced at Chunzong's back, then withdrew his gaze and ignored him. Chunzong could feel the young master's last gaze. He felt more and more strange in his heart. Unusual. At first, Chunzong thought it was a very normal scene. There was nothing strange about it, and there was no need to pay attention to it. But when he looked at it for the second and third time, Chunzong felt something was wrong. Young Masterman's expression was strange. What was strange about it? As Chunzong walked out of the restaurant, he started to think. His mind kept turning, looking for something strange. Strange, unnatural. Suddenly, A flash of inspiration flashed through Chunzong's mind. Unnatural. Yes, young Masterman's smile was very gentle, like a spring breeze, but that was in the eyes of ordinary people or ordinary cultivators. However, Chunzong's soul was very strong, and his perception was extremely sharp. It was far better than that of a half-step saint. Even some Saint Realm masters could not compare with him. Therefore, when he looked at young Masterman for the second and third time, he felt that the young master's expression was a little unnatural. Why was it unnatural? It was a kind of numb, stiff unnaturalness, as if that face was not his. The moment this thought came to his mind, it was as if a bolt of lightning had split the darkness and shattered the fog. A thought suddenly emerged. This young Masterman was unusual. Maybe he was related to the person he was looking for, or even the 100 Faces Shui Tuesday. Judging from his title, the 100 Faces Shui Tu seemed to be a ruthless man with red eyes and a murderous aura. But don't forget that he was very good at disguising. Slowing down, Chunzong immediately thought further. Chapter 1459. It was late at night, and all the lights in the houses were dim. The night was dark, but it couldn't stop the restless hearts of the cultivators. In the flower house, young Master Min, who was dressed in a white robe, was drinking with a seductive woman whose clothes were half exposed. Suddenly, young Master Min struck out with his palm as fast as lightning. The woman fell to the ground and fainted completely. "You've been with me for so long. Are you tired? Why don't we have a drink?" Young Master Min raised the wine cup to his lips, but paused slightly, as if he was talking to the air. It was as if he had walked out of the darkness or nothingness. He appeared in the flower house and sat in front of young Master Min. It was Chunzong. Young Master Min stared at Chunzong as if he had suddenly realized something. He raised his cup and asked at the same time, "Oh, it's you, brother. What can I do for you? Should I call you young Master Min or 100 Blood Butcher?" Chunzong didn't move, but said calmly. His simple words were like a long sword, piercing fiercely. "What are you talking about, brother?" Young Master Min looked surprised, as if he didn't understand Chunzong's words. But in an instant, the wine cup in his hand shot out with terrifying power, as if it could shatter a mountain. The wine cup spun rapidly, and the wine in it turned blood red in an instant, giving off a shocking murderous vibe. Immediately after, young Master Min's right hand turned blood red and was filled with an extremely strong smell of blood. It was like a blood-red swallow sweeping across the sky at an extremely shocking speed. It was like a bolt of lightning, and its trajectory was not straight. Instead, it flew from the side, but it felt like it was faster than a straight line. His fingertips were suffused with a wisp of blood-red cold light, cutting like a blade. Fast. Shockingly fast. This move alone surprised Chunzong. Ordinary high-level half-saints couldn't avoid it and would be killed instantly. Chunzong could tell that this person's strength was definitely not inferior to some of the peerless geniuses from the Xianyuan Sacred War. It was no wonder that so many people had been killed by him. Of course, this didn't mean that this person's talent could be compared to the peerless geniuses in the Xianyuan Sage War. It was because this person had cultivated for a longer time and had settled in the Sage-to-Be level for a longer time. In addition, he had some extraordinary talent and good opportunities, which allowed him to have such strength. In fact, many veteran half-step saints were not talented enough to break through to the saint realm, but because they had been in the half-step saint realm for a long time, they all had extraordinary strength and means. It was normal for those young geniuses to be killed if they were careless. It had to be said that this person was not only fast, but also decisive and merciless. At the same time, a thick smell of blood rushed into his nostrils, penetrating his lungs and rushing straight to his brain. This kind of stench of blood would make people dizzy and distract them for an instant, causing them to be unable to react as quickly as possible and thus be killed. With such a move, this person had already killed many people. This time, he was going to kill another person. However, not only was Chunzong prepared for this, but his perception was also extremely sharp. His opponent's wine cup and hand were all under Chunzong's control, and their trajectories were extremely clear. With a stroke of his sword finger, the half-step sword essence condensed in it and directly cut open the wine cup. Not only did the blood-red wine inside not spill out, but it was cut open as if it was solid and shot back in even faster speed. It contained a sharp and direct sword chi. The sword finger didn't stop, but changed its trajectory and slashed towards the blood-red flying swallow hand. The sword blade was invincible. Young Master Min's expression was cold, and his eyes flashed with terrifying killing intent. He was also a little surprised. Peace so fast. This person's reaction was really too fast. Retreat. Without hesitation, young Master Min turned into a flash of light and retreated at an amazing speed, like a flash of lightning flashing across the sky. This speed surprised Chunzong, and his body movement was even more mysterious. As soon as he moved, Chunzong moved as well. The flowing light, flying shadow, which had been cultivated to the perfection realm, and the half-step thunder essence, instantly flew out. His speed was even more amazing, and he closed in on young Master Min in an instant. Immediately, the gilded mountain sword was unsheathed, and it turned into a flash of golden sword light that tore through the sky and pierced towards young Master Min. Not only was it fast, but it was also extremely powerful. Blood-slaughtering method. A shrill scream suddenly sounded, and young Master Min's body seemed to explode. Endless blood-red light rushed in all directions and quickly dyed the surroundings. The ground, walls, and roofs all turned blood-red in an instant, and a thick layer of blood that was close to a dark red color. In an instant, the surroundings were dyed with a thick blood-red color, as if they were in a blood-red cage. The extremely strong smell of blood constantly filled the air, and it was very pungent and nauseating. The aura and color here would make people feel depressed and extremely uncomfortable. In particular, the dark red color around them was more like a thick layer of blood that was constantly flowing, which was even more shocking. Under normal circumstances, one would be suppressed here, and their strength would be indirectly weakened. If Chunzong was only 90% sure of young Master Min's identity before, then now, he was 100% sure that young Master Min was 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer. Once the blood slaughtering method was performed, 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's robe was also dyed with a layer of dark red halo, as if blood was flowing slowly. It looked very terrifying, and it seemed to have merged with the blood around it, making 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's aura even more profound. On 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's face, the original handsomeness had long disappeared. His face was full of cracks, and the cracks were blood red. He looked like an evil ghost, which made Chunzong's pupils shrink slightly. You will be one more genius to die under my blood slaughtering method. 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's voice had completely changed. It was cold and hoarse, and full of killing intent. I'm afraid you won't get what you want. Chunzong smiled slightly. The aura here was indeed terrifying, and it made him feel oppressed and depressed. However, Chunzong's mind was extremely firm, and it was difficult for external evil to invade. He could completely resist it and was not affected at all. With the sword in his hand, the half-step sword essence surged, and he slashed out. Blood splattered everywhere. A line of bloodlight, as fast as lightning, pierced through everything. In an instant, 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's body was hit, and he had no time to dodge at all. 100 Faces Blood Slaughterer's face was also filled with a trace of disbelief, as if he could not believe that he had been stabbed by young Master Min's sword. Immediately after, a strange smile appeared on 100 Faces Blood Butcher's face, causing people to tremble with fear. The blood around him flowed faster and surged, and the sword hole on his body was quickly healing. Can't kill him? Chunzong frowned slightly, then sneered and slashed out a second time. This time, the 100-Faced Blood Slayer reacted even faster. He turned into a blood-red bolt of lightning and flew out, dodging Chunzong's sword. Blood claws covered the sky and covered the earth as they attacked from all directions. Every attack was extremely sharp and tore through everything. Chunzong narrowed his eyes and saw countless blood-red claws coming at him from all directions. It was as if they wanted to tear him apart completely. With the sword in his hand, all the bloody claws were blocked. The sword contained a rebounding force, shattering the bloodlight one after another. Immediately, a huge blood-red saber light slashed down from the sky, as if it could split a mountain. This was the most powerful attack, and it was also a sure kill attack. The bloody claws all over the sky were just a means. Of course, although it was just a hidden means, it was still very powerful. It would be good if it could kill the enemy, but if it could not, it would be used as a cover for this attack. The saber slashed down as if it could split heaven and earth, and it was going to split Chunzong in half. Chunzong stared at the blood-red saber light that slashed down. The power of this attack was very strong, comparable to that of the top geniuses in the Xianyuan sacred battle, who ranked in the 30th place. However, it was still not strong enough for him. He slashed out with his sword. Extreme heart swordsmanship. Chunzong did not even need to use the celestial crystal body. The sword pierced through the sky and slashed out. The blood-red saber light paused and was immediately penetrated. It mercilessly pierced through Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer's body, which could not dodge. The power of this attack was even more terrifying. This attack directly shattered Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer's neck, and his head immediately rolled to the ground. Countless streams of blood rushed over from all directions. Chunzong waved his sword and instantly cut them off. Then, with a flick, he directly collected the Hundred Faces blood butcher's head and put it into his storage ring. This was the proof of completing the mission. The blood faded, and everything returned to its original state. The room was still the same room, but the seductive brothel girl was already dead. After Chunzong picked up Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer's storage ring, he flicked a spark of fire onto the headless body, and it immediately burned to ashes. Leave. Now that the task was completed, Chunzong had to return to the Xianyuan Palace in the Imperial City to submit the task and get the Xianyuan merit points as soon as possible. On the way back, Chunzong also checked Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer's storage ring. There were many Earth restoration elixirs, human restoration elixirs, and a few heaven restoration elixirs. He was quite rich. Other than that, there were some other elixirs. There were elixirs that could restore one's strength and heal injuries. These were not of much use to Chunzong. Chunzong had many such elixirs himself. What was worth Chunzong's attention were the 3 cultivation methods and martial arts. The first one was the blood slaughtering technique, which was used by Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer. It was a new and quite mysterious technique. Once it was used, it could use the power of the blood slaughtering technique to heal one's injuries in a very short period of time. It was almost immortal. Of course, it was not really immortal. Otherwise, how could Chunzong kill Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer? Even so, it was very extraordinary. Unfortunately, its cultivation method was very cruel and bloody. It was to suck blood, not just a little, but a lot of fresh blood. Chunzong directly ruled it out. The second one was the 100 transformation technique. It was another technique that Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer was proud of. It was also with this technique that Hundred Faces' blood slaughterer was able to change his appearance and escape from being hunted down. Unfortunately, the cultivation method of the 100 transformation technique was also cruel. It was to kill people and peel off their skin, then cultivate it into one's own body. Chunzong could not help but feel a little regretful. Chunzong did not like this method. Since he did not like it, he would not cultivate it. The third one was the body movement that Hundred Faces' blood slaughter used. It was an upper sacred level body movement called Lightning Flash. Among the 3 books, only Lightning Flash was useful to him. The other 2 books could be completely discarded. However, Chunzong did not really throw them away. Instead, he kept them and planned to take them back to Xianyuan Palace to see if he could exchange them for some Xianyuan merit points. If not, it would not be too late to destroy them. Chapter 1460. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. In a disciples' hall in profound Origin Palace, Chunzong opened his mouth and exhaled a breath. The breath was as sharp as a sword, surging endlessly, as if it could pierce through the sky. Feeling the powerful surge of energy in his body, Chunzong smiled. The 15th level of the Great Mystery Formula. After half a year, this top-grade saint-level cultivation technique made another breakthrough, taking another step forward. Chunzong also felt that he had reached the limit of his cultivation method. If he wanted to improve it again, he would have to break through to the saint realm. Limitless, that was just a theory. Every level and every realm had its limits. However, these limits varied from person to person. Some cultivators' limits in the half-saint realm might be the 11th or 12th level, while others' limits were the 13th or 14th level. If there were no opportunities, the 15th level would be the limit of the half-saint realm. It was very difficult to improve from the 14th level to the 15th level. Every improvement required a lot of time and energy, as well as sufficient external forces. For example, in this Earth-grade disciple hall. That's right. Chunzong had been cultivating and carrying out missions for half a year, constantly accumulating profound origin merit points. When he exceeded 10,000 points, he applied for a promotion. The disciples of Profound Origin Palace were divided into levels, and disciples could be promoted. When one had 1,000 merit points, they could apply for a promotion to Profound Origin Disciple. When they had 10,000 merit points, they could apply for a promotion to Earth Grade Disciple. Of course, one had to have enough merit points to apply for a promotion. The Profound Origin Palace's disciple system was very comprehensive. When Chunzong applied for a promotion, it was approved immediately after half an hour. After the application was approved, Chunzong's disciple level was promoted from Profound Origin Disciple to Earth Grade. His authority also increased, but Chunzong still couldn't live in the Earth Grade Disciple Hall. Therefore, there was a limit to the number of disciple halls in Profound Origin Palace. When Chunzong became a Profound Origin Disciple, there happened to be an empty Profound Origin Disciple Hall. This time, the Earth Grade Disciple Hall was full, so he could only challenge. Survival of the fittest, so simple and direct. Chunzong won the challenge, so he naturally won the right to live in the Earth-ranked Disciple Palace. Of course, he also became enemies with that person because of this. After cultivating the great profound origin art to the 15th layer, his energy had become even more majestic and pure, and his strength had also increased. Reaching the 15th level of the greater mystic art is already my limit. There's nothing in the Mystic Yuan Palace that can help me break through my limits. As for the Earth-class Disciple Authority, it allowed Chunzong to see a portion of the Heaven-class Disciple Authority. One of them was to enter the Xianyuan Sacred Tower to cultivate. Chunzong was very tempted, but when Chunzong saw the required Xianyuan merit points, he was dumbfounded. 10,000 merit points for 2 hours. In other words, the 91 hours of cultivation time he had previously obtained was equivalent to 910,000 Xianyuan merit points. After half a year, Chunzong knew how difficult it was to obtain Xianyuan merit points. 10,000 merit points would take him almost half a year, and half a year's worth of hard work could only be exchanged for 2 hours of cultivation time in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower. It was really... Chunzong didn't use his merit points to exchange for cultivation time in the Xianyuan Sacred Tower. 2 hours was too short, and it wasn't that obvious to the current him. After all, he could only reach the 7th level now, and he was very clear about the effects of comprehending the 7th level. These 10,000 merit points could be used by Chunzong to exchange for the complete Great Profound Origin Art, but for now, it was enough for the first 20 levels. I've already comprehended 70% of the half-step lightning intent. This Thunder Echo Pill contains the Tao of lightning intent, and it will have a miraculous effect on comprehending the half-step lightning intent. I can exchange for it. Chunzong's eyes narrowed as he glanced over. A single Thunder Echo pill required 1,000 Xinyuan merit points. With his 10,000 Xinyuan merit points, he could only exchange for 10 pills. Of course, Chunzong wasn't clear about the effects of the Thunder Echo pill, so he would try to exchange for 3 pills first. As for the fusion of the half-step sword intent and the half-step fire intent, the progress was very slow, and he was only at 40%. However, the power of 40% fusion was obviously much stronger than that of 100% half-step sword intent. If that Chunzong's strength was even stronger. Soon, a glowing white jade bottle was sent to Chunzong's hand. Inside, there were 3 pills. The pills were thumb-sized, round, and rippling with a purple halo. There seemed to be arcs of electricity jumping around in the halo, making a faint sound. Thunder Echo Pill. After adjusting his breath, Chunzong threw a Thunder Echo pill into his mouth and swallowed it, and began to cultivate. Traces of electricity immediately scattered from his body, appearing on the surface of Chunzong's body and wandering around. Chunzong's consciousness was completely immersed in comprehension, and the 70% half-step thunder intent condensed into a bolt of lightning that surged endlessly. The Thunder Rhyme pill was refined using a special method, and it contained the aura of the Tao aura of Lightning Tao Insight, and it was helpful to the comprehension of Lightning Tao Insight. Of course, the Thunder Rhyme pill contained very little Lightning Tao Insight, and it was entirely insufficient to comprehend Lightning Tao Insight, but it was sufficient to comprehend half-step lightning intent. After the power of 1 Thunder Echo pill was consumed, Chunzong felt that his half-step thunder intent had improved, and he continued to take the 2nd pill. Then he took the 3rd pill. When the power of the 3rd Thunder Echo pill was completely consumed, Chunzong's half-step thunder intent also welcomed a breakthrough. 80%. The power of 80% half-step thunder intent was even more powerful. To be able to break through to 80%, other than the power of the Thunder Echo pill, it's also because of my own accumulation and comprehension. Chunzong's thoughts were very clear. If it were other people, 3 Thunder Echo pills might not be able to make their half-step thunder intent breakthrough from 70% to 80%. Since the Thunder Echo pill was effective, Chunzong continued to exchange the remaining 7,000 Xinyuan merit points for 7 more Thunder Echo pills. In the end, he only had a few hundred Xinyuan merit points left. He continued to take the Thunder Echo pills. When he finished taking the 7 Thunder Echo pills, his half-step thunder intent broke through again. 90%. Chunzong let out a sigh of relief after stabilizing. He could no longer improve quickly, and his Xinyuan merit points were almost used up. Suddenly, Chunzong couldn't help but feel a slight headache. He had to go on a mission again. With his current strength, those missions weren't difficult at all, but with his current level, he still couldn't achieve difficult missions. Relatively speaking, Chunzong didn't like to go on missions so much, and it wouldn't have the effect of gaining experience. However, in order to obtain Xinyuan merit points, he had to go. Chunzong opened the mission panel and started to search again, looking for a mission that was suitable for him and could satisfy him. After searching for a while, he still wasn't satisfied. In desperation, Chunzong could only choose some missions that were just passable and spend some time to complete them. Just as Chunzong was about to choose a mission that was just passable, suddenly, a red light flashed rapidly on the panel. It was very intense, as if a bloody light was spreading with some kind of ominous feeling. Chunzong squinted his eyes slightly, feeling that the red light was dazzling and eye-catching. After the red light flashed for a few breaths, it didn't die down but spread on the panel. Immediately, a paragraph of text appeared, as if it was written with blood. It was a mission, a new mission, which directly attracted Chunzong's attention. This was an urgent mission to gather a group of half-step saints to go to the Lesser Void Realm to kill the Void Demons. Void Demons. Chunzong's pupils shrank slightly. The Xinyuan dynasty's Xinyuan army was in the Void Battleground to resist the invasion of the Void Demons. The Lesser Void Realm was a space attached to the Void Battleground, a secret realm. Although the Xinyuan army was guarding the void battleground, accidents still happened. Some of the weaker void demons would sneak into the lesser void realm, and then enter the Xinyuan dynasty through the lesser void realm. Every time a void demon sneaked into the Xinyuan dynasty, it would cause a lot of damage and casualties. After all, the void demons and the human clan were not the same race, but enemies. Therefore, every time a void demon sneaked into the lesser void realm, there would be an alarm, and a group of powerful half-step saints would be dispatched to kill them all. If they weren't killed, even if only one void demon invaded the Xinyuan dynasty, it would still cause a lot of casualties. This mission was marked in bloody red, indicating that this mission was very dangerous, and even the disciples of the Xinyuan palace would be in danger of death. Of course, the reward for this mission was also very generous. Killing a lesser soldier rank Void Devil was worth 1,000 merit points. Killing an elite rank Void Devil was worth 10,000 Xinyuan merit points. Chunzong was very tempted. When he knew that the Xinyuan army was fighting against the Void Demons, Chunzong had done some research. The Xinyuan dynasty, or the Tianyuan sacred region, divided the demons of the Void into different levels. Miscellaneous demons were equal to high-level half-saints. Of course, the demons of the Void were very powerful and were often stronger than half-saints of the same level. The elite rank Void demons were at the Saint Rudiment stage, equivalent to the first Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Above the elite rank was the Soldier rank, equivalent to the second Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Above the Soldier rank was the Murderous Soldier rank, equivalent to the third Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Under normal circumstances, the Void demons that sneaked into the Lesser Void realm were at the elite rank. However, the elite rank Void demons were very terrifying, and ordinary First Heaven Saint Rudiment stage were no match for them. This mission is suitable for me. Chunzong's eyes shone brightly as he muttered to himself. There was a trace of excitement in his voice. Not only were the Xinyuan merit points rewarded, but they would also be able to have a life and death battle with the powerful Void demons and hone themselves in the midst of life and death. Not only could he obtain generous Xinyuan merit points, but he could also train himself and stimulate his potential. It was killing two birds with one stone. As for the so-called danger, one had to be prepared to face all kinds of dangers when embarking on the path of cultivation. Sometimes, one would even have to look for danger himself. Without hesitation, Chunzong immediately accepted the mission because there was a quota for this mission. 100. The quota for this mission was 100. When Chunzong finished looking at the mission, more than 30 people had already accepted the mission. When Chunzong accepted the mission, the number instantly jumped to 100. All 100 quotas were accepted. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.